Hey guys, tonight we slip out of your modern bed and into a room where the air is colder than your fridge's vegetable drawer, where wooden shutters make the dark feel thicker, and where the first sound that cuts the night is not a phone alarm, but the sacristan's bell testing its voice across steep roofs and chimneys. You're going to try surviving one medieval day, start to finish, and I should warn you now, you probably won't survive this with your dignity or your arches intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love seeing the little constellation of places we all gather from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The bell keeps calling, and you lie there pretending the straw tick under you is a luxury mattress. It pokes your shoulder blades with the delicate enthusiasm of a hedgehog in a hurry. You take a slow breath, smell wood smoke wedged into the timbers, old tallow, and last night's stew ghosting the air. Above you, rafters cross like ribs. Outside, cobbles breathe out the night's chill. The bell's cadence marks more than time. It marks obligation. In most towns, bells regulate the day. Prime, terce, sext, anchoring work and worship. You roll to your side, ears open, and realize there is no snooze button except the neighbor's rooster, who is famously unreliable and does not accept software updates. You sit up carefully, because haste is how you invite splinters. Your linen shift has the softness of a well-worn dishcloth, but it's yours, and that counts. Somewhere in the alley a cart rattles, a dog gives a single opinionated bark, a shutter clicks. You're getting the first truth of medieval mornings. You live close to other people. Close enough to share air, noise, and occasionally lice debates. Light is a rumor seeping through the gaps. You pull your mantle around your shoulders and stand, feet hunting the floor's friendlier boards. The fire in the hearth is a sullen constellation of embers. You kneel and coax it like a moody cat, laying a wisp of kindling, then a stick, breathing until the coal sighs awake. It's not much, but it's flame, and flame makes the room remember its courage. You bite into a heel of yesterday's bread, hard enough to qualify as light carpentry. A sip of small ale follows. Safe water is not a guarantee, and even a weak brew is kinder to your inside parts than the well sometimes is. First joke. Congratulate yourself. You've just had a medieval breakfast called "Whatever Didn't Run Away Overnight." Your jaw negotiates with the crust. Your hands find the bucket by the door. The communal well is only a short walk, which is medieval for "Please enjoy your daily core workout." You push the latch, shoulder into the pale morning, and the street whispers under your boots. The town before sunrise is a creature turning over. A washerwoman passes, skirts hitched, a basket perched like a moon. An apprentice hustles with a bundle of wood, sleep still clinging to his lashes. The beetle stumps along, pretending he woke first. The bell tugs again. 1, 2, 3, and somewhere a priest's cough answers. Your feet remember every uneven stone because they met each of them yesterday. As you head for the well, you promise your future self you'll carry 2 buckets to save a trip, which is a lie both of you understand. Here's a mainstream fact to tuck behind your ear. Bells are the public clock. In an age without wristwatches, their rhythms weave the day, summoning to prayer, to market, to curfew. Curfew, from couvre-feu, cover the fire, is a rule that says, Bank your flames, shutters closed, streets quiet. The law aims at safety, but it also reminds everyone who commands the hours. If you're listening closely, the morning bell you hear now is not just sound, it's policy swung on a rope. The well's rope creaks as you lower the bucket, and your breath lifts little clouds. 2 women already wait, discussing mold in the oven and the price of onions with the energy of a parliament. You nod hello in the diplomatic language of people who need water before sentences. When it's your turn, you haul, forearms burning, a private gym with a public audience. The bucket sloshes cold against your shins, politely reminding you that the day will not be cried through on the couch. You balance it hip-wise, a move taught by 1,000 mothers and a few heroic uncles, and begin the careful trudge home. A quirky tidbit for your collection. Many people expect to wake twice. The first sleep and second sleep pattern, dozing from early night until after midnight, then waking for an hour or two to pray, talk, even visit neighbors quietly, before sliding back down until dawn, shows up in letters and literature. Historians still argue whether this biphasic sleep was universal, or just common in certain regions and seasons. But right now, with chill nibbling your fingertips, you feel how natural that middle-of-the-night island might be. You, however, had only 1 sleep and 12 anxieties. Back inside, the room greets the bucket like a guest of honor. You set a pot near the flame and watch the surface shiver as it warms. The little space is a catalog of the day waiting to happen. A bundle of kindling, a coil of rope, a patched cloak. The iron pot with a dent like a dimple. You check your shoes, turn shoes, simple, clever, and rub a thumb along the seam. They are not waterproof, and neither is your afternoon, but one problem at a time. The promise of heat finds your hands. You extend them over the hearth and let warmth climb your wrists. You're aware of your stomach holding a quiet meeting. There will be bread later, and maybe a pottage coaxed from cabbage, oats, and patience. For now, you rest your forehead against the cool lintel and let the room's sounds build. The fire's tiny applause, a child muttering in sleep, a distant hammer choosing a rhythm. Your shoulders lower a fraction. Second joke, if you had a medieval smartwatch, it would say, "You have done 127 steps. Congratulations, you've circled Europe." You think ahead because surviving the day requires a schedule stitched to bells. Prime, chores and errands before the streets clog. Terce, markets and guild errands. Sext, a pause, a prayer, and the small meal that would disappoint any influencer. None of this waits for your motivation. Motivation is lovely. Obligation gets the buckets lifted. You draw a line through the things you must do before the bake oven queue gets rude, and you lay out the scratchy layers you'll wear once the chill stops biting and starts merely chewing. Through the shutter seam, a thread of color appears, a pinkish surrender along the edge of rooftops. The town is exhaling, the long breath between night's guardedness and day's performance. You are part of the exhale whether you feel ready or not. Another mainstream note. Soft as a footfall, parish life holds your world together. Alms, gossip, baptisms, beadledom, and bells. The community is the net under your tightrope, and also the reason the rope wobbles. You ladle warm water into a wooden bowl and splash your face. The shock turns your eyelids into flags. Clean is a sliding scale, and you're somewhere between respectable and visited the goat. There will be a chance later to chase a bucket bath if luck, privacy, and a lavender sprig align. For now, you press a rough cloth to your skin and listen as the bell calls again. Brighter, nearer, confident. Third joke. You privately name it cardio with Saint Whoever, because your pulse rises every time it rings. You take one more bite of yesterday's diplomacy-grade bread and set your jaw toward the door. On the lintel hang your dreams of an easier morning. You leave them respectfully where they are. If you pass today's test, you'll fetch them back tonight and let them whisper while you sleep. The bucket waits to be refilled soon, the hearth to be fed, the city to be negotiated in all its narrow streets and wider expectations. You practice a small nod that says, "I meant to be up this early." And in that tiny performance, you start to belong to the day you must survive. You lift the latch again and step into pre-dawn proper. A sky the color of unpolished pewter. A wind that edits your posture. And the soft shuffle of neighbors who, like you, did not choose the hour but accept its terms. The bell finishes its sentence. You breathe once more, deeper, and let the day take your hand. You keep the door on a quiet hinge, hug the street's shadow, and join the little procession moving toward the well. Clogs, boots, bare feet, a rhythm of people who learned long ago that the day is easier when the bucket is full. The bell you renamed cardio with Saint Whoever has stopped scolding. Now it's just the soft pad of steps and a crow with managerial opinions. You practice the bucket hip carry again, the old choreography that leaves one hand free and your spine pretending to be a sturdy beam. At the square, the well's stone lip sweats a coolness you can feel before you touch it. The rope is a tired serpent, braided and shiny from 1,000 palms. You nod to the women already there, to the old man with a yoke across his shoulders, to the child tamping enthusiasm like a loose cork. Your turn comes with the familiar groan of wood over wood. The bucket drops, water embraces it with a slap, and you haul, arms prickling, knees giving brief commentary. Light joke 1. Congratulations, you've subscribed to a full-body workout called Medieval Functional Fitness, equipment included. Coach is gravity. You balance the slosh, listen to gossip skim the surface. The price of onions is climbing. A baker's nephew singed his eyebrow. A stranger rented straw in Elsbeth's front room. You tuck these into the pocket in your head where small news keeps you afloat. Here's a clean mainstream fact to go with the water. Towns often regulate wells and conduits with very modern-sounding rules. No washing hides in the bucket, no watering animals at the curb, fines for throwing kitchen waste too near. In London and other large towns, public conduits, fountains fed by springs through lead pipes, were guarded against mischief because mischief, it turns out, loves plumbing. The carry home is measured in careful steps. You set the full bucket just inside the door as if placing a crown, then crouch by the hearth where last night's embers remember being stars. You pull aside the ash with a slow spooning motion. Banked coals sleep under a blanket of their own making, and you find a cherry glow the size of a coin. You smile at it the way you'd smile at a friend who swore they'd meet you at dawn and has technically arrived. You lay straw like a nest, set a twist of dry twig, then angle the ember into the tinder with an iron hook and the kind of prayer that's really a breath. If the ember pouts, you reach for the tinder box. Flint, steel, a scrap of charred cloth. The ritual is older than your street. Strike, bright bees of spark. Strike. One lands and smolders. Coax. Patience becomes oxygen with a name. A fringe, almost mischievous tidbit for your evening trivia. Some folks carry a rind of amadou. the felt-like layer from the tinder fungus, foams fomentarius, softened with lye or urine, then dried, a miracle pad that catches sparks like a born collector. Others keep spunks, little sulfur-tipped matches you touch to a coal so fire agrees to be social. You blow, slow as advice. The ember fattens from red to the serious orange of a decision finally made. A curl of smoke writes one undecipherable word in the air. The twig snaps into flame as primly as a nun lighting a candle. You stack small onto small knuckling twigs into a lattice, then lay a split stick, the whole scene like building a tiny house that only eats and glows. The room brightens by a degree you can feel in your knuckles. Light joke too. If you had a smart thermostat, it would sigh. Best I can do is less shivering. Water moves to the iron pot with a wooden ladle. You tilt, listen for the first shy chatter as the bottom warms. Ash flecks ride the surface. You chase them with a spoon, and the patience of someone who knows cleanish is the season's current mood. The bucket waits for laundry, for porridge, for hand-washing that will feel heroic even if it looks modest. You shift a log, oak if you have it, brush if you don't, and remember that fuel is as much calendar as it is warmth. In some towns, wood is dear, charcoal dearer, peat a blessing wet months resist. You keep tally the way good survivors do. One for the pot, one later for evening, one to be the hope you'll be glad you kept. Your fingers, now brave with heat, move to the day's list. Bake oven queue before it snakes. Guild errands while the masters still have smiles. Market before weights go mysteriously light. The ember coaxing becomes a metaphor you don't say aloud. Most things here start small, smoldering, and grow only because you leaned close and breathed. You clean a cup with sand and stubbornness, then pour a little warm water to take the edge off the morning. You wet a cloth. Steam rises like a tame spirit. You press it to your face and shoulders, the sensation enough to teach your bones a better mood. You may, if luck visits, chase a proper rinse later in the day. For now, this is the kind of clean that makes neighbors nod and not step back. Somewhere beyond your shutters, someone laughs. A wheel hits a stone. A dog reminds pigeons they are unlicensed. A debate rustles like skirts in a doorway. Did people mostly drink ale because water was unsafe? Or is that one of those tidy myths we love because it's easy to remember? Historians still argue whether town water was uniformly hazardous or just selectively untrustworthy. Some wells sweet, some sour. Many perfectly safe when not sabotaged by proximity to, well, medieval living. You sip small ale because it is handy, because it's calories, because brewing the weak stuff makes water behave. You also drink water because you must. Survival tends to ignore think pieces. The flame, now confident, licks the pot's sides. You drop in a pinch of oats saved from supper's arithmetic, a leaf or two if you own a garden box on the sill, a whisper of salt if your purse permits. The spoon makes the slow clockwise circle of people who believe in calming rituals. Light joke 3. Clockwise because counterclockwise summons a tax collector. Steam threads your hair. You breathe through it and feel how even a thin porridge can hang a little weight on your day, enough to get you to the market without counting your ribs. A second trip to the well tempts you. It always does, because future you loves present you when the bucket is full. You compromise with a half fill, just heavy enough to respect, but not enough to baptize your boots if you stumble. Out and back again, you pass a neighbor using a flint and steel under a hooded lantern, guarding the spark from a jealous breeze. He nods. The fellowship of early firemakers, an order older than any guild. By the time you settle the second bucket, the room's scents have negotiated a truce. Smoke stepping back from acrid to friendly. Porridge smelling like a promise. Damp wool remembering it has a purpose. You rub your hands together out of habit, out of gratitude, out of the need to keep blood doing its rounds. The hearth is now a partner. You can leave it an hour and trust it not to sulk out. You bank a corner just in case, ash drawn, ember buried, insurance against unlucky gusts and forgetful feet. Before you go, you perform the tiny inventory that means you're learning. Hook, spoon, ladle, pot, poker, tongs, trivet. You touch each of them like checking pockets. You tap the doorframe twice, your private charm. Superstition coexists just fine with practicality here. In fact, they share a cup and argue politely. If anyone asks, you'll say the tap keeps out drafts, and you almost believe it. The street outside has light stitched to it now. Pink pulled through gray, a seam catching. You shoulder the mantle, hook the door, and let your eyes recalibrate to the pail. The bucket is not in your hands. That alone feels like flying. You step into the wakening murmur. Warmed at the core and faintly proud of a fire that started with almost nothing and became enough. It's a small victory, and small victories are the currency of this day you plan to survive. You warm your hands one last time over the hearth and turn to the small stack of clothing waiting like a committee. Supportive in theory, scratchy in practice. Survival today means dressing not just for weather, but for status, for rules, and for the silent language of cloth. You start, as almost everyone does, with linen next to skin. A shift that has known the wash tub, the mangle, and the resilient optimism of lye soap. It's cool at first touch, a brief hiss of goose flesh. Then it settles against you like a promise that the wool to come won't bite quite so hard. The brays, your linen shorts, go on with a bit of wrestling. The drawstring has opinions. Hosen follow, two tapered legs of wool that climb to mid-thigh and tie to the brays or to a belt, depending on which tailor last won your trust. The wool isn't gentleness incarnate, but it remembers your shape and warms as you move. You lace them with a small flourish because you can, because flourish is free. Light joke 1. Medieval athleisure, now with 100% more laces and 0% elastic. Next comes the kirtle, the everyday backbone of dress, whether you are he, she, or they with slight variations, pulled down over the linen, laced at side or front. The fabric carries yesterday's smoke in its seams. The gussets, those clever triangular inserts, make your stride say capable instead of trust goose. If you work, your kirtle is plain and durable. If you're luckier in coin, it's dyed with woad or madder, or a blend that makes a sober green. Here's a mainstream fact to tuck into your girdle. Wool and linen are the twinned pillars of medieval wardrobes across much of Europe. Wool for warmth and outer layers. Linen for what touches skin and for household cloths. Silk exists, yes, dreamy and distant, but it costs the sort of money that acts like a gate. You reach for the belt and feel its practical authority, the place where knife, purse, and keys live. Pockets don't exist yet as secret caves sewn into clothing, so your little scrip hangs in the clear for the world, and thieves to consider. You pat the purse to make sure coins haven't learned to fly. A small wooden comb slides into its own loop. Knit combs are real and busy here. You've met them before when you felt a tickle under your hairline and performed the famous polite itch in public. You keep a sachet tucked in, maybe lavender, maybe a pinch of rosemary, because if the world refuses to be entirely clean, it can at least be interesting. Buttons wait in a little row. The kind that started appearing more widely after the 13th century and changed how sleeves fit and how vanity smiled. You fasten them with care. Button envy is a known condition on feast days. Over the kirtle, if weather scowls, you add a coat or a plain surcoat, and your hood with a long tail, the liripipe, drapes around your neck like a smug snake. Some fool somewhere cut his liripipe so long it swept the floor. You are not that fool. Light joke 2. Today's forecast, chilly with a 40% chance of tripping over your own fashion choices. You check colors in the small mirror of the window glass. Well, not a mirror exactly. More like reflective advice. Your mantle is undyed. Your kirtle a workaday brown-green. Your hood a decent blue. That too speaks. In many towns and kingdoms, sumptuary laws ride alongside taste, telling you which furs, which fabrics, which extravagances belong to which ranks. You, humble citizen, are not supposed to swan about in ermine. You are more a squirrel fur, vair person, if fur at all. The law can be petty, but it is also a map of anxieties. Who's rising too fast? Who wants to look like a somebody? Who needs reminding that clothes are a fence as well as a blanket? You adjust your belt. There. Appropriate. On the table sits your cap. Hair is more than vanity. It's modesty, hygiene, a signpost. You tie your coif or veil or felt cap according to custom and comfort, taming flyaways that always revolt at dawn. A quirky tidbit to amuse you while you fuss. Some folks keep pomanders, little perforated balls for scent, stuffed with herbs, resin, sometimes even a whisper of ambergris if fortune ever winked. They swing from girdles and make the air around you feel curated, which is a very polite way of saying, the fishmonger's stall is next door. Let us all be good neighbors. You fold your sleeves back just one turn. The cuffs show clean linen, and you feel instantly more capable. Your hands know the motions as you lace, tie, adjust, pin. Spiral lacing for the kirtle, ladder for the sleeve if you're fancy, a straight pin here to coax the neckline into civility. A question scratches at the door. What exactly did undergarments look like for everyone? Historians still argue whether structured breast support garments, call them bras if you like, were common earlier than we thought, given finds like the 15th century linen pieces at Lengberg Castle, or whether those were rare birds rather than everyday sparrows. Either way, you arrange what you have so comfort and movement shake hands. Shoes slide on, turn shoes with seams that try not to drink puddles, soles thin enough to teach you the biography of every cobble in town. You note where the stitching needs wax and where a stone tried to introduce itself yesterday. You think about pattens, wooden overshoes, that might save you from the morning's more conversational street corners. You decide to bring them. Saints love the prepared. You hang your knife, tool and utensil, and the little whetstone that keeps it honest. A rosary or paternoster beads loop at your belt. Even if you murmur prayers mostly at bells, the beads are both anchor and ornament. You thread a plain ring on a cord and let it rest over your sternum, a small appointment only you need to remember. Over everything, your cloak settles, a woolen weather argument, clasped at the shoulder where it won't choke you if you run. Light joke 3. Not that you plan to run, but markets have a way of inventing cardio when cheese goes on sale. You give yourself the sniff test. Smoke, wool, a trace of herbs, and nod. Respectable. The mirror window gives you a faint blur of a person who looks like they belong to the street outside. You smile at the blur, and the blur approves. The clothing speaks a dialect the town understands. Your dye choices and fabric weight. The absence of mink. The presence of honest mending at the elbow. You iron the mending flat with your palm because you are quietly proud of those tiny, neat stitches. They say what you cannot afford to shout, I keep things going. You test your range of motion, crouch, lift, reach. No seams complain. You tuck the hem so it won't mop alleys. If work calls you to a loom, the sleeves won't eat the warp. If to a stall, the belt won't slice your waist every time you bend. Your mantle's edge becomes a portable napkin, an apron, an extra pocket if you pinch and tie it just so. Clothes here are verbs, not nouns. At the threshold, you pinch your hood a little tighter against the draft and let your palm rest on the wood. You feel the grain under your skin, and beneath that, a different grain. The day's plan waiting for your first move. You're dressed not just in fibers, but in rules and weather, and 1,000 other people's glances. And you're dressed to survive. To carry water without slipping your hose. To queue at the bake oven without advertising wealth you don't have. To nod at the beetle without inviting questions about the fur trim you definitely aren't wearing. One last look around. On the peg, a fine Sunday garment reserved for feast and marriage. On the floor, yesterday's shirt destined for a vigorous conversation with the washtub. In your pocket, that is not a pocket. A little chalk, a stub of wax, a pin. Outside, the world, buttoned to the weather, laced to the hour, ready to read you at a glance. You lift the latch, and the mantle's shadow detaches from your shoulders as you step into morning, wool whispering, linen breathing, leather bending, the whole wardrobe working like a well-rehearsed chorus that plans to see you safely through to curfew. You slide into the street with your mantle tucked and your stomach making persuasive arguments. The air tastes of ash and yeast, which is the city's way of promising breakfast without actually delivering it. You aim your steps toward the communal bake oven, a belly of brick that eats fuel and gives back order to the morning. Everyone you pass carries something. Boards with loaves proofing under cloth, crocks of batter sloshing like sleepy tides, bundles of kindling for the oven-warden who keeps the heat honest. You clutch your own dough, coaxed last night from flour, water, a pinch of yesterday's leavings, its surface dusted so it won't cling to your hope. The queue already whines like knitting. You fall in behind a woman whose peel is tattooed with scorch marks, ahead of a boy guarding a pan of little loaves shaped like birds, which stare at you as if you're the villain in a very small epic. The oven-warden, cap low, eyesight sharp, walks the line with the authority of someone who controls minutes and crust. He chalks symbols on each board, a private astrology that means, yours goes in after hers, and if you argue, your stars will dim. Light joke 1. You consider bribing him with your winning personality, but your personality forgot its coin purse. Heat shimmers at the mouth of the oven, a dragon breathing politely. When the warden opens the iron door, the rush of warmth makes your eyebrows threaten to curl. You slide your loaf in when your mark is called, the peel's wooden lip tick-ticking against brick. The dough leaves you decisively, and you step back as if you've just launched a very small boat. The warden times each bake by practiced senses, how flour ghosts the air, how the draft licks, the color of the ceiling soot. An hourglass would be fancy, his nose and knuckles are clocks enough. Here's your mainstream fact for the morning. Across much of medieval Europe, bread is regulated by law. The Assize of bread and ale in England, mirrored by ordinances elsewhere, fixes price to grain cost and punishes short weight. Bakers mark loaves so inspectors can tell who to lecture. A defective loaf can earn you a pillory vacation. In some towns, a baker might be dragged on a hurdle for light bread. Public literacy in arithmetic, one loaf at a time. You glance at your dough as if you can will it to be heavy with righteousness. While the oven does the invisible work of turning patience into crust, you sit on the warm step and sort your other breakfast plan. Pottage. Survival's faithful stew kisses the line between soup and story. In your bag, a heel of cabbage, a small onion that thinks highly of itself, a fist of oats, and the yesterday bones you traded for from a kitchen that values you as an enthusiastic listener. In your pocket that is not, a pinch of salt that costs like gossip. Expensive, but not optional if you want your tongue to feel appreciated. You calculate portions with the care of a scribe tallying taxes. Everyone good at being alive is good at arithmetic. You ladle water from the bucket you stole from future you. Light your travel trivet under the warden's indulgent eye. 1 thumb width of charcoal for heat, and set the little pot to thinking. Onion first, because hope deserves fragrance, then cabbage ribbons, then the oats falling like a brief edible snow. A bone goes in with a plop that makes the boy with the bird buns look up, impressed. Steam rises with a humility you trust. Light joke too. If a modern chef appeared, they'd call this heritage broth with rustic grains and charge you your winter boots. Along the bench, talk bubbles as predictably as pottage. Grain was dear last month. The miller insists the river owes him a grudge. That reminds you of mills and rights. A practical chain that tethers bread to power. In many places, you owe the Lord's mill your custom, paying in coin or in a mulcture, a scoop of your grain that becomes his. It's called soak, banal rights. You bake here, you grind there, because the charter says so. You wince for the neighbor who tried a hand mill and found his quern confiscated. Freedom tastes lovely. Confiscation does not. You check the pot with a spoon and find the oats are softening into kindness. You add a whisper of last night's drippings, a story about fat and generosity, and a sprig from the little sachet you carry, lavender's cousin rosemary flirting with the steam, a quirky tidbit to earn you a nod at dinner later. Some people stamp their loaves with seals, initials, symbols, even little saints, so they can find them again in the communal oven, and so the inspector knows whose arithmetic to test. The warden here uses chalk and memory. Elsewhere, bakers sign crust like lawyers. The loaf comes out when the warden declares it finished with a tap that sounds like well-tuned wood. You receive it with both hands. The weight is honest. The crust sings as it cools. Tiny crackles like a handful of dry leaves. You hold it close and try not to look like someone considering an immediate, impolite bite. You fail. The first mouthful scalds your lip just enough to make you hiss in a very dignified way. The crumb is tight but open, the yeast's faint tang like a friendly argument. You tear off a piece to float on the pottage, and the pot says, yes. A debate drifts through the steam, the sort scholars can argue into next harvest. Were spices here mostly camouflage for dubious meat, or were they primarily baubles of status and genuine taste? Historians still argue whether medieval cooks used cloves, pepper, and saffron to conquer spoilage, or to boast refinement, given that expensive spice on a table shouts as loudly as ermine on a cloak. In your bowl today, the hottest thing is the temperature. Spice is for feast days. Pepper, measured like pearls. Your tongue doesn't mind. Hunger is the best seasoning, says everyone's grandmother, who remains undefeated in proverb bouts. You watch a woman trim the top from a loaf and begin hollowing it like a tiny architect. She's making trenchers, stale bread plates that will sop up gravy at midday before becoming the last course for someone with fewer coins. Bread, here, is furniture and dishware and currency, all at once. Another neighbor bangs his measure on the bench, a standard quart, iron and serious, so nobody argues volume. In bigger markets, official pecks are chained to the cross to prevent creative reshapings. Civilization is, among other things, an agreement about the size of containers. Somewhere near your elbow, a child yawns with theatrical importance. You offer a spoon tip of pottage and receive a look of reverent betrayal when it proves to be cabbage forward. Light joke 3. You whisper, "It's dragon soup," which improves nothing but your sense of mischief. You add a little salt wedge to your bowl and respect the sudden bloom of flavor, thinking of far salt pans and long carts, and why your purse feels thinner when the cellar feels richer. The warden allows you to keep your pot near the oven's mouth a bit longer. The oats need the kind of persuasion only steady heat can deliver. You pick up your loaf and stamp it lightly with your own invention, a little line made with a clean nail. Not official, but it tells your eye which bread is yours if the bench grows busy. The boy feeds his bird buns back a glance and names them each: Pip, Rye, and Trouble. He asks if yours has a name. You say, Survival. He considers, nods solemnly. Survival looks delicious. You set your bowl aside to cool and let your mind run ahead to noon. A wedge of bread, the rest of the pottage reheated till it blushes. Maybe a sliver of cheese if the market smiles and the beetle looks elsewhere. Bread will repeat all day, patient as a bell. You'll carry a heel in your scrip, a little edible insurance policy. If someone needs a favor, you'll pay in crust. If someone shares gossip, you'll break a corner as thanks. Bread does more than stop hunger. It oils conversation. Steam thins. The pot's surface makes that little rooming house sound. Soft, shared, confident. You stir one last circle and taste. It's better than it has any right to be. Cabbage sweetened by heat. Onion gone silky. Oats lending body like a kindly aunt who insists you wear a sweater. You blow across the spoon and eat slowly because the morning has begun to accelerate and you refuse to sprint yet. At your back, the oven hums like a living thing. In your hands, the loaf warms your fingers as if you're holding a domesticated son. You pack up. Loaf wrapped in cloth, pot lid tied with a cord, a smile for the warden you hope will earn you the same mercy next time. The street beyond the oven is growing noisy. Guild bells will tug soon, and the day will splinter into errands. You tuck your bread into your scrip. Adjust your belt, and feel the little, dense happiness that only a hard-won crust can cause. The lavender in your sachet leans into the steam, and briefly, miraculously, the morning smells like a garden beside a bakery, beside a hearth you coaxed alive with your own breath. You stand, thank the heat the way sailors thank wind, and step back into the braid of voices and feet, fed enough to keep going, not so full you forget yourself. The city ahead is all measurements and bargains and watchful glances, but for once you feel ready to be measured. Bread in hand, pottage in belly, you make peace with the hour. Guild Street isn't a street so much as a noise with paving stones. You ease into the flow like a fish with errands, bread tucked in your scrip, pottage doing its quiet warming work in your middle, lavender sachet attempting diplomacy with the world. Doors unlatch, hinges clear their throats. The first hammer taps are cautious, then confident, then competitive, until the lane rings like a xylophone someone forgot to stop playing. You step sideways to avoid a ladder, sideways again to avoid a barrel, sideways a third time to keep your dignity. Survival today is mostly the art of small adjustments. Apprentices, bleary and brave, blast past in twos, carrying boards, tool rolls, and the haunted look of people who overslept by exactly one moral failing. A boy with ink on his fingers keeps his quills clamped in his teeth like a hedgehog. A girl with a basket of leather scraps strides as if souls can be bullied into existence. Masters appear in the doorways like punctuation marks, full stops with aprons, commas with spectacles. You nod to each in a neighborly dialect. Respectful, brisk, not obsequious enough to make your belt ashamed. You catch a cart's axle before it kisses a gutter stone, and the carter returns your loaf-sized heroism with a grin. Little favors accrue here like interest. A wedge under a door, a shoulder to a sack, a quick, mind your peel. These will come back to you as a second's grace when you need it. Light joke 1. You are building a savings account denominated in not being yelled at. You tuck the memory of the cart into the pocket of deeds you hope someone else is keeping track of besides you. On your left, the smithy breathes color, orange and white glaring in the dim like domesticated lightning. The smith lifts and turns and judges iron the way a baker judges crust, by sound and resistance. Sparks go up like migrating fireflies, and you step wider because you wore wool today, not hubris. A mainstream fact walks out of the heat with him. Guilds, smiths, weavers, cordwainers, carpenters, regulate training and trade across towns great and middling, setting apprenticeships that can last 7 years, scoring journeymen who wander for work and wisdom, and demanding a masterpiece, a literal best work, before a craftsperson can open a shop and hang a sign with confidence. You glance at your own hands and wonder what your masterpiece would be. A perfectly coaxed fire? A pottage that makes cabbage feel aristocratic? The lane narrows at the weaver's lofts, and you brush the hanging warps with your sleeve like tall grass. Inside, treadles thunk, shuttles whisper, and the cloth advances in dignified inches. A woman at the window beats the weft and mouths a prayer between blows. Not piety exactly, more like rhythm. Historians still argue whether guild rules protected quality or throttled innovation, whether they raised standards and wages or built fences to keep out competition that looked, embarrassingly, like new ideas. From where you stand, the fence seems to have a useful gate, if you know the password, the handshake, the cousin. A quirky tidbit drifts out from a doorway with the smell of varnish. The guild chest, where records, seals, and coin live, often has several locks and just as many keys, distributed among officers so no one person can make mischief alone. It's practical and theatrical, a ceremony each time the chest opens, a reminder that the craft's memory is a group project. You wish, briefly, your pantry had 3 locks and 2 witnesses every time someone eats the last of the cheese. You thread between a cooper shaping staves and a joiner coaxing a mortise to mind its manners. Their work is poetry in right angles and arcs. Your job is to not interrupt the stanza. You duck as a plank swings. You hop as a puppy gallops, a piece of twine in its mouth like it has arrested it for vagrancy. You hand the twine back to the child who belongs to it and earn a silent, gap-toothed blessing. Light joke 2. You add assistant to the assistant cooper to your imaginary CV. A beetle ambles through in a gown that says official and a face that says bored until provoked. Weights come out, measures get eyed. He tilts a scale, not to cheat but to feel if the pans move honestly. You recall the standard measures chained in the market, iron pecks and gallons, because nothing ruins community quite like creative container sizes. You slip past before he remembers you owe a farthing for last week's argument with a rope that looked municipal. You shoulder into the scrivener's shade to buy a scrap of paper and a drip of ink. Luxuries, yes, but handy when a day keeps inventing lists. The scrivener is already scribbling contracts for a tanner who smells of alchemy and river. The quill's scratch is the sound of promises being made official. You trade a coin and your best attempt at neatness for a leaf and a crumb of wax. The scrivener tips you a look that translates to, spell it like you mean it. You will. You always do. Outside again, a tray glides by at shoulder height. Apprentice under it, pies upon it. You salute the tray as one salutes passing royalty. Pies wink back, possibly malicious. You do the honorable thing and do not buy one yet. Your loaf still has a job today. Next door, a goldsmith polishes a ring until the morning is reflected in miniature. You don't go in. You don't even stop. Windows like that tax your self-control, and you intend to have enough of it left to endure the afternoon. At a doorway, a mistress of the tailor's gestures you inside to hold an edge while she pins a sleeve for a customer who has important shoulders. You hold, she pins. You receive a gratitude plum in the form of a gossip hint. Someone's daughter is betrothed to someone's journeyman, and the promise of a half hand of thread when the offcuts are sorted. Thread is coin where mending is religion. You bow and float back out, richer by a length of whispered future. The bell at the parish end rings terce, a gentle, practical reminder that hours are braided by both prayer and production. You mark it, not with kneeling, there's only alley here and splinters, but with a pause and a breath, a habit more felt than seen. Across the lane, a baker's boy sets out a tray of yesterday's bread. Cheaper. Welcome. Two widows confer and make the arithmetic work. On feast days, you know, the same square will sprout a miracle play scaffold, and smiths will be devils, weavers will be angels, and everyone will forget for an hour who owes whom for nails. You pull your little list from your scrip, the new strap you promised the cobbler to collect, the spool to trade for the mending you can't postpone. The inquiry you must make at the chandler's about tallow that doesn't smoke like a fire with opinions. You scratch a mark with your new ink. It looks dramatic and runs a little. Light joke 3. Your handwriting has the swagger of a rooster and the coordination of a calf. You blow on it and pretend you meant the blot to be a flourish. Between the carpenters and the glaziers, sun heats the street enough that wool reconsiders its life choices. You tug your hood back and let your scalp negotiate with the breeze. Someone plays a tabor badly. Someone else sings a fragment of a ballad that won't leave your head until curfew. A cartwheel squeals like a gossip scolded. The smell shuffle goes, pitch, yeast, horse, smoke, humanity, repeat. You are improbably content, fed enough, useful enough, busy enough to feel like one stitch in a larger garment that might not unravel if you tug it. A thought sidles in from the edges. Who belongs, officially? You think about women in craft, brewers, silk workers, seamsters, whose names live in guild rolls in some towns and only in tax lists in others. Historians still argue whether female membership was commonplace or mostly through widows' rights and household status, whether the records undercount or customs overruled ink. On this street, reality seems comfortable with contradiction. A mistress supervising 10 looms here. A wife helping at a bench there, while doing all the things that make help look like leadership. The last errand of the hour drops into your hands with the weight of leather. The cobbler's strap, punched and honest, warm from cutting. You pay with 2 small coins and a promise to fetch his wife a sprig of rosemary from your sill. Favors loop back faster than carts. He throws in a nail, just one, because you laughed at his joke about shoes that pray for dry weather. You tuck the nail with the wax and the chalk and feel like a very prepared magpie. By now, Guild Street is fully awake, the apprentices less frantic, the masters more so. You check your mental ledger. 3 kindnesses granted, 1 received, a strap acquired, a blot made, a bell respected. You turn your steps toward the market proper where weights waggle, and clipped coins sulk, and the beadle's eyebrows write terrible poetry about honesty. Your bread bumps your hip like a pet who approves. Your lavender sachet loses the argument with the tanner's doorway, but rallies near the chandler's. You breathe in, slow as a bell rope, and step into the next arithmetic of your day. Tools clattering behind you like applause you don't need but will take anyway. The market opens like a book you can smell. Canvas awnings snap, poles thump into sockets, and a chorus of hawkers clears its throat into harmony. Onions with opinions, cheese the color of reliable sunrise, fish announcing their biography to anyone within sniffing distance. You aim down the central aisle where honesty is supposed to live, chained to the public measures like a pious dog. The iron gallon, the quart, the peck, each heavy enough to discourage creative interpretation. You pause at a stall where apples stack in pyramids the size of modest sins. The seller lifts his bronze weights with a flourish, and you look for the little official stamp, a crown, a city mark, proving they've been tested. He sets a weight. The scale tilts. He adds fruit until the arm remembers its manners. You watch his thumb because everyone does. Light joke 1. Your rule of thumb is to keep an eye on other people's thumbs. He chuckles, removes the offending digit, and you pay in coin that has had, shall we say, a complicated childhood. Your purse clinks like hope. Coins in this world lead active social lives, clipped, shaved, sweated, hammered again under royal authority, then clipped anew by people who insist they're just lightening the load. A mainstream fact to keep handy. Coin clipping, paring the edges of silver pennies and larger pieces, was a persistent medieval headache, punished severely in many realms, sometimes by mutilation, or the kind of public justice that made everyone reconsider becoming an amateur mint. You palm a penny and glance at its edge. The king's face inside glares as if he's tired of weight loss programs he didn't authorize. At the moneychangers' bench, a man with forearms like rolled maps flips your coin, listens, then drags it across a black stone. The touchstone that reads silver like a clever teacher reads essays. The streak it leaves tells him whether your penny is honest or pretending. He nods, shaves a fraction for his fee, and slides a better-behaved coin back across the plank. You thank him with the politeness reserved for people who mediate between you and confusion. He winks, because he knows you'll be back before noon with another handful of tiny mysteries. You move on past fish, eyes bright and accusing, laid in ranks on wet rushes. A boy sprinkles water as if baptizing future suppers. Somewhere, a cat arranges its face into innocence. The herring seller makes a pitch sharp as vinegar. You almost admire her for selling yesterday wrapped as today. The salt price, she notes, justifies everything. You counter with the dignity of someone who can count to 12 in 2 languages. The negotiation lands you 3 fish and a moral you'll forget by tomorrow. You wrap them in clean leaves and promise yourself you'll cook them before they begin composing an aria. A barrel of ale thumps down near your knee. The tapster bangs in the spile and draws a sample in a horn cup for the beadle to taste. Ale is not just drink, it's audited. The Assize of bread and ale, law with a memorable ring, ties prices to grain costs and punishes the watery and the weak with fines, or, in memorable cases, a public dunking chair where brewers contemplate recipe integrity over an unexpected bath. You sip when it's your turn, find it sound if shy, and nod. If your sip had found treachery, your lips would have reported it to your conscience, and your conscience to your mouth, loudly. At the cloth stall, you thumb a bolt of plain wool and ask for an L. The clothier produces his L-rod, a yardish stick defined by local custom, and you eyes on, no blink, watch the measure kiss the fabric. In some markets, the official L hangs at the cross, ready to shame pliable rods. Today's stick feels honest. You pay in coin, then in caution. You ask for the snipped selvage end as proof later that the length was true. He nods approval. You nod back, the secret handshake of people who would like their sleeves to fit. Near the center cross, a crier belts news like he's paid by volume. A lost pig with a bell on its tail. A ship come in with saltfish. A notice about night watch passwords. A reminder that anyone caught rinsing guts at the conduit will finance a new lid for the conduit. The crowd listens with one ear while haggling with the other. You absorb what matters. The password tonight is candle. The countersign is safe. The pig answers to princess, which you find unintentionally profound. Now your purse meets its test. You owe the chandler a few farthings for last week's tallow that smoked like a philosophical argument. He's replaced your candles with new pours, swears on his mother's plum cake these will only smolder if you insult them. You slide coins over. He lifts them one by one, bites one theatrically. Light joke too. You resolve to bake a cake so sturdy it can be used to detect counterfeiters. He throws in a wick, for cheer, and you tuck the bundle deep. Across the aisle, a woman sells spices by the pinch from a box divided like a chessboard. Pepper dark as secrets, cinnamon curls, a few threads of saffron that glow as if they remember a warmer sun. Prices make you swallow. You buy 1 clove because it is both medicine and mood, and owning it makes the day feel a half-inch grander. A debate wafts with the scent. Were spices everyday camouflage for questionable meat, or mostly a show of wealth and taste? Historians still argue whether the kitchen's curry of cloves and pepper was practical preservation or edible theater. You tuck the clove into your purse as if its aroma might also guard your coins. You pause at the scales again, this time to sell a strip of mended cloth to a neighbor who needs patch material. The beadle leans in like an ant. He watches the weights with bored ferocity. You wish him peace and he grants you bureaucracy. He does, however, wrap the scale of a neighboring stall where the pan sulks high until a thumb cedes ground. A small fine, a big frown, the market's little ecology adjusting itself back toward balance. It will tilt again within the hour because people are people. Still, the ritual matters. Quirky tidbit to keep between your ears. Some purses hide tiny charms stitched into the seam. Bits of scripture, a saint's thread, even a pebble from a holy well, insurance against thieves and temptation. You run your thumb along your purse's edge and consider adding a secret stitch later. A vote for luck in a legislature of caution. A money changer shouts about foreign coin, French gros, Flemish grote, Milanese soldi. The bench becomes a classroom in comparative monarch faces. He weighs, values, scribbles rates with chalk that marks his fingers whiter than justice. You overhear talk of a recoinage, whispers that the crown plans to call in old pennies and send out new, fresh, uncompromised ones. Recoinage days are headaches measured in cues. If that rumor is true, you'll be standing here again, reciting a litany of, "No, I think that one is mine." You take stock. Bread safe, cloth bought, fish balanced like a dare. Candle bundle promising light with fewer opinions. Your coins have thinned without asking your permission. You fold your list, add a dot of ink to mark the done, and perform the mental magic trick of turning less money into more decisiveness. Light joke 3. You reassure your purse that it's on a new diet called Market Day. A final stop at the stall with measures, not for buying, for reassurance. You lift the standard pound, feel its heft, remind your muscles what honest feels like so you'll know when dishonest tries to cuddle. The stallman grins, lets you set it down with a thump that makes nearby cheaters flinch, possibly by coincidence. You tuck your ell of cloth deeper, pull your hood a little forward, the sun has that look, and angle toward the church end where the bell will soon nudge you toward Terce's pause. As you go, a thought flickers. Coins are only part of the market's blood. So much of this place runs on credit, tally, and trust. Chalk marks on a shutter, notches on a stick split in two so both parties keep a half. Did people mostly barter? Did coin rule? Historians still argue whether day-to-day trades leaned heavier on running tabs and favors, with settling done at quarter days, or whether cash jangled more often than letters suggest. You're living the answer. You owe thread and rosemary. You're owed a favor and a wedge of cheese. Money keeps score. Memory keeps dinner. The crowd closes behind you, a tide backfilling your wake. You step out of the current, check your purse string twice, then a third time because paranoia is cheaper than replacement. The bell lifts its voice, a friendly summons, not a scold, and the market's tempo shifts one notch toward the sacred. You've been measured and you've measured, clipped nothing but prices with your gaze, and your pockets hold enough of the day to make the afternoon possible. You angle toward the church, coins quieter now, heart a little noisier, and think of the next task waiting at the edge of the square. A quick devotion, a breath, and then back to labor where blisters do the math and time is kept in footsteps and chimes. The bell you renamed cardio with Saint Whoever raises its voice again. Not a scold now, but a beckon that gathers the heat of the market and turns it toward a cooler square. You fall in with the others, traders, apprentices, a widow with a basket that smells faintly of dill, feet aligning to a rhythm older than hunger. Terce or sext, depending on the town and the season, but everyone simply calls it the midday bell, the hinge of the day. You let the sound comb your thoughts into narrower lines, and you slip through the churchyard gate where nettles keep their own small theology near the wall. Inside the porch, the holy water stoops where fingerprints into the stone. You touch, cross, and feel the little shock of coolness against skin warmed by errands. The nave holds its usual weather. Incense and damp lime wash, a faint beeswax sweetness. The hush of people adjusting themselves into reverence. Sun finds colored glass, and the floor obligingly holds a patchwork of saints' capes for your feet to step through. You nod toward the rood screen the way you nod at a neighbor you like but don't borrow money from, with fond caution. You stand where standing is the custom, men toward the south aisle, women toward the north, though it's more guideline than law when baskets and fatigue insist on creative seating. A clerk hums the tone, and the bell's echo settles into human breath. The words are familiar even if your grammar sometimes trips over Latin's hems. You've learned the cadence by living near it. A mainstream fact worth pocketing. For many towns, bells and the canonical hours, matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline, are the public clock, regulating work contracts, market openings, and even the timing of legal business. When the chime rides the air, the city's calendar turns a page you can hear. A priest moves with the practiced economy of someone who could set the whole liturgy up in the dark, and once did when the candles sulked. You add your voice when it matters, your silence when it helps. The petitions land like pebbles in a shallow stream. For travelers, for the harvest, for the child who gave the parish goose 3 new opinions yesterday. You light a small tallow candle at Saint Roche because he's good company when talk turns to fevers, and your purse can afford this tiny, flickering treaty with uncertainty. Light joke 1. You whisper to the flame, in exchange for not coughing, I promise to stop calling pottage beige stew out loud. A friar in patched gray leans near the font, smiling like someone who has listened to many categories of worry and found them all shaped like people trying. He speaks softly about alms, not like a demand, but like a gate left open. You put a coin in the box with an air of conspiracy, your attempt at being kind without announcing it to the saints like a brass band. Above, the rafters hold a barn's memory. Below, the stone remembers knees. A baby hiccups, and 20 heads soften at once. You drift toward the side altar where a reliquary winks in its glass. A sliver of bone, a thread of robe. A story you were told by someone who was told by someone who swore they saw the bishop unwrap it with hands that shook. A quirky tidbit for your mental cabinet of wonders. Certain churches keep rattles or clappers for Holy Week when bells fall silent, wooden tongues that knock the hours into shape without metal, a sound like a reprimand inventing rhythm. Somewhere, too, there's a parson who swears by mixing a pinch of holy dust into mortar to keep a wall from sulking down in winter. Faith consults physics. They exchange nods. A confession line makes a short, untidy tail along the north wall. You weigh the line against your list and decide your sins can simmer until evening when the queue thins and the priest's temper has been marinated in vespers. Still, you kneel on the bench for a moment and practice the inventory. Sharp word to the baker, grudging thought about the chandler, the habitual, private suspicion that you might be the only reasonable person on your street. You offer them like pebbles and feel lighter by 3 pebbles. The parish clerk posts a notice on the pillar with wax. Tithe collection day next week. A nudge written in the hand of someone who enjoys the tales of letters too much. Tithe, 1/10 in coin or kind, is a law you live with the way you live with weather. It takes its share of your harvest or your earnings, and, in return, the parish feeds the poor, keeps the church roof from resigning, and pays for candles that behave better than last year's experiment. A woman behind you mutters arithmetic into her veil. You sympathize. Light joke 2. You consider tithing 1/10 of your blisters, but the box is not large enough. A monk visiting from a nearby house gives a brief address, voice low enough to invite rather than insist. He speaks of work as prayer with tools for beads. He speaks of mercy as a ledger where nobody bothers to total the columns. You let the words pass over you like warm air from a bakery door, not grabbing each sentence, just inhaling the gist. Historians still argue whether lay attendance at the little hours, terce, sext, nun, was common habit among townsfolk or something more occasional, tethered to feast days, proximity, and personal zeal. Today, the nave stands witness. Plenty come. Some slip in and out, others bow as they pass the door with hands too full for kneeling. The bell is an invitation, not a summons with teeth. The prayers fold into dismissal as neatly as they began. Before you turn, you sidle to the pillar with the gilt candles, fat tapers carved with emblems, a hammer, a shuttle, a shoe. You scan for the poor box under St. Nicholas, because he has a reputation for knowing the geometry of need. 2 pence in. No witnesses, except maybe a saint with a twinkle. You breathe the quiet like someone let you stand in the shadow of a large, patient animal that will not step on your toes if you stand still. On the way out, the parish beadle, rank and file version, not the market's thunderhead, leans close and reminds you of Sunday's procession. Garlands for the statue, children with paper crowns, choir practicing the descant that half the town will hum off-key anyway. You promise to bring rosemary and not to sing like you're trying to frighten crows. He looks relieved. You realize you have been seen, and being seen kindly is a currency all its own. The porch offers you back to daylight. Pigeons conduct their municipal meeting on the roof. Someone's dog sleeps in the churchyard like it owns the lease. You touch the gatepost on the way out. Not exactly superstition, more like punctuation. And the bell gives one last hum as if it approves your grammar. Light joke 3. You add, consulted with upper management to your list, and immediately cross it off for the pleasure of crossing it off. You step into the square where the market has softened a notch, voices rearranged by the pause. The same smells arrive in a different order now. Wax first, then yeast, then horse, as if the church rethreaded the air. Your shoulders sit lower on your ribs. Your errands are not fewer, but they feel less like orders and more like choices stitched to necessity. You make the sign of the cross almost without thinking, not as a performance, but as a hinge that lets your mind open back toward labor. Before you move, you look up. A gull writes a crooked line across a clean patch of sky. On a windowsill 2 stories up, a girl waters time and gives you a salute with the watering pot. You salute back with your list. The day waits. Tools to be pushed, cords to be tied, a coin to be coaxed into being more than it is. But for a measure of bell time, you stood inside stone and story, and let your pulse borrow the church's slower beat. That rhythm lingers in your feet as you turn toward the lane where work counts the minutes on your hands, and the sun argues that you should already be 3 tasks ahead. You tuck your candle into the safety of your scrip, adjust the strap the cobbler cut so well, and head for the workshop row where blisters keep honest books and masters keep louder ones. The city resumes its industrious mutter. You walk into it, a little steadier, a little less alone, as if the bell is still dragging a silver thread through your chest to keep you from unraveling. You aim your steps toward labor like a ship steering for wind at both fears and needs. The workshop row is a jawline of open mouths, doorways chewing daylight into strips, each room a different grammar of effort. Your hands already remember the tools before your mind signs the consent form. Mallets wait, shuttles glide, awls persuasion. A master stands near the threshold with a posture that measures people the way scales measure flour. You nod just low enough to be safe, just high enough to be human, and step inside the day's arithmetic. If you're weaving, the loom greets you with its stern kindness. Warp threads stretch like harp strings, whispering, "Don't tangle what can be taught." You plant your feet on treadles rubbed smooth by many mornings and press, left, right, pattern remembered by ankles. The shed opens, and your hand drives the shuttle through the tunnel you built with your legs. Beat, breathe, beat, breathe. The cloth begins to happen, wool crossing wool into something warmer than either strand alone. Light joke 1. Congratulations, you are a human printer. Your ink is patience, and your paper is rude. Or maybe today the master points you toward the joiner's bench where wood waits for its new biography. You clamp the plank, taste the dust like mild cinnamon, and let the plain turn rough into polite. Curl after curl drops to the floor, coiled commas eager to be swept into future kindling. The mallet enters the scene, head thumping with the moral clarity of percussion, persuading a mortise to accept the truth about tenons. You work in fractions, a hair off here, a breath there, the difference between snug and sulky. Tools don't lie. They say exactly what you did. Your thumb soon remembers why thumbs were invented, to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. You suck a nick, not dramatic enough to brag about, just personal enough to make the day feel specific. The master glances up, counts the seconds your hands are not moving, and returns his gaze to a ledger that seems to track everything. Wages, wood, hours, and possibly the exact number of times you sighed this week. You adjust posture, redistribute enthusiasm, and the ledger's invisible eyebrow lowers. Here's your mainstream fact, entering with its boots clean. Medieval work rhythms, especially in towns, flex with daylight and the church's hours. But records from guilds and manors alike show that people often worked long, seasonally variable days. Summer stretching toward 15 hours of usable light. Winter mercifully shorter, with customary pauses for food and worship woven in. That's not a factory whistle. It's a bell and a sun negotiating schedules. You feel the truth in your wrists. Summer asks for extra. Winter returns a fraction of it with thanks paid in darkness. You settle into flow. At the loom, your feet become metronomes. At the bench, your hands learn the grain's mood. You use your body like a list. Shoulders for pushing, hips for bracing, breath for pacing. The thread occasionally throws a tantrum, fraying where you thought goodwill lived. The chisel occasionally sulks at a knot. You make amends with beeswax and persuasion. You tuck a wedge of your bread into your cheek, chew like a discreet squirrel, and keep rhythm because stopping means negotiating for momentum again. And momentum is a precious, skittish creature. A journeyman passes you the awl, a slender promise disguised as a point, and asks you to mark evenly along a strap. It's the cobbler's piece you collected earlier. Now your responsibility to perforate without inventing new swear words. You count stitches like prayers and stab holes like commas where the sentence of leather needs to pause. Somewhere behind you, a lathe sings, wood turning into circles that will later pretend they happen naturally. The room smells of resin and sweat and the international language of hard work. Quirky tidbit for your pocket. Some workshops keep a clock you don't expect. A notched candle that marks the hours it takes to copy a deed, boil glue, or finish a certain number of picks on a loom. Burn to this notch, beat to that tally, and the task should be here. It's less tyrant than tutor. A waxy mentor that reminds you when to stretch your back and when to apologize to your spine. You glance at the candle in the corner, stubby, scarred, bossy, and decide you respect it more than you fear it. The master does his rounds with a silence that amplifies every mistake. He stops at your loom, pinches the cloth's edge, and nods the way people nod at babies who look acceptably like humans. You glow a little, then immediately extinguish the glow because pride trips over heddles. He moves on, pausing to correct a novice's shuttle throw with 2 fingers and an eyebrow that could flatten currents. You feel an absurd siblinghood with everyone in this room. All of you trying to keep your work out of the path of avoidable disaster while courting the kind of skill that makes a day feel written on purpose. A bell from down the lane rings the quarter. You can't see the sun's angle, but your shoulders know it's climbing. Sweat decides it lives here now. You push a sleeve up and find yesterday's mending grinning back at you. Tiny stitches holding line against friction. The little thread gift from the tailor's mistress waits in your script for the next emergency. You hope it isn't today, which guarantees it will be. Light joke 2. You draft a strongly worded letter to fate and then forget where you put it. Sometimes the day gives you field work, a crooked plow and a stubborn strip of rented ground beyond the walls. When that's your job, the task is an argument with geology. You lean into the stilts, feel the share bite, and listen to soil tell you last winter's story, in clods and stones and unexpected pottery shards. The ox watches you with patient skepticism. You steer lines straighter than yesterday because practice is a benevolent tyrant. Historians still argue whether peasants and smallholders were overworked to caricature, or whether seasonal rhythms allowed more feast and rest days than our modern dramatic imaginations admit. Standing behind a plow that wants creative freedom, you suspect both can be true. Exhaustion and holiday dancing in a complicated marriage, with the weather officiating. Back in the shop, a woman leans into her loom with the quiet force of a river sluice. Her shuttle snaps through like a small bird. She and the journeyman exchange the short, efficient conversation of co-workers who have solved things together in emergencies. Thread, knot, thanks. The guild role might list her as helping, or ignore her entirely. The cloth on the beam disagrees and writes her achievement row by row. You smile privately at this small rebellion of competence. Your shuttle nicks your knuckle for looking away like an impatient teacher. You apologize to the loom with a pat. The loom accepts. The work song rises. Someone starts a line. Someone else harmonizes without warning. And soon the shop's noises arrange themselves into accompaniment. You add a bar when your breath lets you. The words are about a miller who married a belle, and together they told the town to sleep. It doesn't make sense, and doesn't need to. Rhythm does the heavy lifting. Nonsense greases the gears. Light joke 3. You consider composing Ode to a Splinter, and decide the world is not ready. Lunch is a pause conducted by necessity, rather than permission. You lean on the threshold where a draft negotiates with your sweat. A heel of bread breaks into democratic pieces. and your pottage reheats on the small room stove until it remembers to be kind. The fish you bought at market whispers that it would prefer to be eaten now. You give in before it writes a letter to the parish. A pinch of that single clove dusts the pot, and suddenly your spoon believes in grace. A small debate wanders through the doorway with a traveling peddler. Do masters here generally pay by the piece, by the day, or keep a tab that settles at quarter days with sighs and blessings? Historians still argue whether wage work was the norm, or if households blurred the line between labor, training, and sustenance in ways that make modern categories fidget. You count your coins, count your favors, count your progress along the cloth, and conclude that however the ledger is arranged, your hands will argue for your supper with loops and blows and steadiness. The afternoon throws one more quiz. A warp thread snaps, the kind of break that can unzip a day. You breathe, ease the tension, fish the broken end out with a hooked wire, splice in a new thread, and massage the knot so it disappears into the pattern like a guilty thought. The first picks after a repair always feel like stepping onto ice. Then the rhythm returns, smaller for a moment, then surprisingly larger, as if the loom respects your diplomacy. When the master finally grunts the dismissal that means, turn the cloth off, bank the stove, don't pocket my nails, you are already halfway to tired. You sweep the floor, corralling curls and splinters into a future fire. You oil the heddles with economy because oil has a personality. You fold a scrap of cloth for your own mending and promise to replace that all leather before it bites your palm again. Your hands are a map now, a blister beginning here, a bruise considering a career there, a small triumph line where you didn't bleed today. You wash in a bowl of lukewarm honesty and watch the water cloud with a day's worth of proofs. You step out, shoulders heavier than when you came in, but heart oddly lighter, as if work siphoned off a portion of worry and burned it for fuel. The street recognizes your gait, slower, looser, proud in a private way. Behind you, the workshop mouths close one by one, chewing the last of the daylight. Ahead, the city shifts key toward afternoon errands and the business of keeping bodies clean, fed, and out of the beetle's poetry. You rub the edge of your lavender sachet, inhale something gentler than pitch and glue, and think about the next small victory. Water that doesn't bite, a bucket bath if luck winks, or at least the kind of rinse that tells your skin it still has advocates. The bell somewhere down the lane lifts its voice, and your pulse obediently matches the beat. You survived labor's chapter of the day. The index of your palm says it wasn't free, but it was earned, and that earns you the right to walk toward evening with your head making fewer lists and your feet composing slower sentences. You turn your steps toward the shop with the green-stained mortar on the sill, the one that smells like a garden that learned arithmetic. Your hands remember the day's tools. Now they want gentler ones, leaves, oils, vinegar that bites kindly. The apothecary's door pushes back as if testing your commitment, then gives, and you slip into a room where bundles of dried plants hang like sleepy bats. The air tastes of mint, fennel, and a darker note, wormwood maybe, threaded through with beeswax and wine. The apothecary nods the hello of a person who knows both your pulse and your gossip. Shelves hold jars labeled in a tidy Latin that reassures even if you parse only every third word. Rosin glows like amber sunrise. Honey waits patient in glazed crocks. A tidy army of seeds sits sorted. Anise, caraway, coriander. On the bench, a brass scale settles into honesty. You present your list. Something for the ache in your wrist. Loom diplomacy has a price. A rinse for a scratch that seems interested in expanding its social circle. And, if fortune smiles, a posy to tuck in your hood that does more than smell optimistic. The advice comes measured like powder into papers. Comfrey for bruises, ground to a poultice. Calendula petals to coax a scratch toward humility. Rosemary for a steam that clears the head without scolding the lungs. A mainstream fact stands politely at your elbow while you nod. Medicine here speaks humors. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, each linked to heat and moisture, to temper and season. The goal isn't to bulldoze symptoms, but to rebalance. Bleeding, purging, sweating, 3 verbs that aspire to be cures. You submit your wrist to gentle prodding and accept a jar of salve that smells like a forest taking notes. A barber surgeon across the lane waves you in for a look gratis, which always means with the option to add drama. His shop is an essay in cheerful danger. Razors honed to sermons, basins shining, a stool of ominous practicality. The pole outside is banded red and white, the rumor being it remembers blood and bandage. He says it's just handsome. He offers leeches as if introducing you to sociable neighbors. You decline with a smile and the diplomatic phrase, "Let's see what the salve says." Light joke 1. You tell the leech you already have a strict savings plan for your blood, and it is not currently hiring. He shrugs and returns to a client who wants a beard squared to the horizon. A stool in the corner holds a urinal flask. Old urine shimmering like faint amber. Uroscopy, the art of reading health in color and clarity, is part performance, part pattern recognition. Gold as a coin? Good. Clouded, pale, angry? Less good. The barber lifts the flask to the light with a seriousness that makes everyone behave. You're relieved when he does not invite your opinion. You would only offer looks hydrated. Back at the apothecary, you purchase a cone of sugar the size of a small bell, neither common nor absurd, enough to sweeten a dull remedy and bribe your mood into cooperation. The apothecary wraps it in paper like a mystery. You add a few cloves, their scent climbs into your eyes. He tablets some rhubarb for when stew forgets its manners, and you promise to remember the dosage and not invent your own adventures. A woman arrives with a child flagging like a drooping flower. The apothecary warms wine with rosemary and a pinch of cinnamon until the vapor demands everyone breathe friendlier. The child sips, color walks back into her cheeks, and the room's shoulders collectively lower. Medicine here is as much theater as therapy, but the theater has rehearsed. Even placebos can be ambassadors for calm, and calm persuades bodies. Historians still argue whether households leaned harder on herbal knowledge that actually worked, or on ritual that merely soothed, whether remedies recorded in leech books and recipe rolls were practical kitchens of care, or libraries of kindly superstition. Your lived experience suggests the border between works and helps is often a footpath, not a wall. You ask about vinegar of the 4 thieves because rumor says it scares pestilence from your doorstep like a broom with attitude. The apothecary smiles the smile of a person who keeps both myth and measurement on good terms. He macerates herbs in vinegar, rosemary, sage, lavender, thyme, and recommends a dab on the wrist for crowded days. Will it stop death at the market? Probably not. Will it make you feel braver while you price onions? Almost certainly. He pours a little into a stoppered vial. It flashes like honest rain. Quirky tidbit for your cabinet of oddities. Somewhere, a pilgrim hawks cramp rings. tiny metal bands blessed by a king to ward leg spasms and other maladies. Do they work? They work like many things work. Part metal, part story, part hope. You could buy one, but you suspect rosemary, stretching, and not lifting the entire well by yourself will do more. Still, you enjoy the fantasy of a ring that negotiates with cramps on your behalf. For the scratch on your forearm, a love note from a disapproving crate. The apothecary recommends honey under a linen square, then a clean wrap. Honey keeps company with wounds like a reliable friend, drawing, soothing, refusing to host uninvited guests. He measures beeswax and oil into a pot, melts them into a salve that cools into a puck the color of afternoon. He adds a breath of frankincense because your skin deserves both therapy and ceremony. You pay with a coin that remembers being a slightly larger coin in a happier time. A friar passing by pauses to discuss a hospital down the road. Not a modern ward, more a house of hospitality where the poor, the pilgrim, the plain unlucky get food, a bed, and prayer. You've been there once to visit a neighbor after a roofing argument with gravity. Sisters move through the hall like quiet solutions, washing and murmuring. A mainstream Assize settles in. Medieval hospitals often served souls as much as bodies. Almshouse, hospice, infirmary braided together. Care as an act of mercy rather than a science lab. Still, the hands were caring, the linens clean, and sometimes that is what pulls a fever back from arrogance. You step out with your bundle of small healings and your little bottle of vinegary courage. The sun has slid, the market's pitch softened. You pick a sprig of rue where it leans over a fence. It pays rent by smelling stern. And tuck it into your hood, not because you swear by it, but because your grandmother once did, and she is frequently right even when she is unscientific. Light joke 2. You whisper, "May rue keep out malice and also my tendency to buy another pie." There's always the neighbor alchemist who swears by powdered unicorn horn, which looks suspiciously like something goat adjacent, and the auntie who recommends spiderwebs for cuts if the spider is paid fairly. You nod at both. You keep the comfrey and honey on the front shelf. Historians still argue whether folk and learned medicine were truly separate lanes or braided together in kitchens and cloisters. University physicians prescribing, wise women brewing, barber surgeons cutting. All inside one complicated conversation conducted over centuries and dinner tables. By the conduit, two women swap recipe cures. Plantains soaked in urine for stings. You try not to picture the soaking bit. Sage gargles for throats. Mustard plasters that make chests sit up straighter than they meant to. A man with a limp holds a string of amulets as if they purr. You wish him a day with less weather inside his bones. A child runs by with a posy of sweet woodruff, announcing it keeps nightmares away if you tuck it under your pillow. You'll try anything that convinces sleep to play nice. You wash your hands at the conduit with the prim care of someone who has learned the geometry of illness firsthand. Clean is relative. Cleaner is reachable. A debate nudges your ear as the water cools your wrists. Were medieval people uniformly filthy? Or did they wash more often than modern jokes allow? Public bathhouses in some towns. Soap from animal fat and ash. Linen shifts laundered regularly because skin is persnickety? Historians still argue whether dirty is a fair verdict or a lazy punchline. You punchline less these days. You've seen neighbors scrub benches with sand until they glowed and wash rushes swapped before feast days like a liturgy. On your way home, you pass the barber again. He's tying off a neat bandage and offering a patient a cup of something warm that pretends to taste better than it smells. You give him a two-finger salute. He lifts a leech in reply as if it's a duet partner. Light joke 3. You tell it to break a leg. It looks like it might. You tuck your salves safe, your vinegar safer, and your pride safest of all. The pride that comes of having a pocket full of little answers for a body that asks many questions. Back in your doorway, you set the honey on the shelf where light can bless it, and you can see that blessing. You smear the comfrey salve on your wrist. Warmth moves into the ache like a neighbor with stew. You rinse the scratch and anoint it with honey that remembers summer. You breathe rosemary steam over the basin and feel your head clear as if someone opened a window in your skull. Health here is not one miracle. It's 100 ordinary negotiations. Plants, patience, prayer, and paying attention. The day will offer you splinters and smoke, and maybe a beetle's frown. Your remedies will offer you a seat at the other side of the table. You descend into your body one exhale at a time and decide, not for the first time, that survival isn't just about avoiding trouble. It's about cultivating the habit of repair. You drift toward the butter-yellow timbered hall where business with a capital B happens. Brawls sorted into quarrels, quarrels shaved into fines, fines stacked into repairs for a bridge that still complains like an old knee. The square outside has that crackling energy of an audience before a play. Only the actors don't know their lines because the script is today's temper. The reeve stands by the doorway in a cloak that used to be more decisive, flanked by 2 sergeants who look like they practice frowning recreationally. A scuffle breaks open near the ale stall. 2 men, one with yeast on his sleeves, the other with fish trust issues. Words flap, elbows declare themselves, a cup takes flight and becomes modern art. You step sideways, then decisively backward, the choreography of people who plan to stay unbruised and fully employed. A beetle's staff wraps the cobbles and the crowd unknots just enough to give the law a middle aisle. You exchange a look with the woman next to you that translates to, "I will absolutely tell my loaf this story later." The fishmonger claims the baker cheated weights. The baker counters the fish could audition for a second life. The reeve listens with a face like a freshly wiped slate, chalk ready. He calls for the town pound weight, the one no thumb dares flirt with, and a standard measure. The sergeant places them with a thunk that makes the market's more creative souls reconsider their hobbies. Mainstream fact-stepping onto the stage with clean shoes. In many towns, civic authorities kept official weights and measures, sometimes literally chained to the market cross, and held view of frank pledge or periodic courts to police nuisance, bad measures, and breaches of the peace. The chain isn't just metal, it's a sermon about honesty. Weights tell a story more patient than shouting. The baker's scale, when rid of thumbs and theater, behaves. The fishmonger's pan looks at its cargo and sighs like a poet. The reeve taps the barrel, pinches a gill, sniffs with the holy authority of a man whose nose has a vote. He finds the fishmonger 2 pence for stale illusions, and the baker a farthing for public rhetoric. The crowd approves this equal opportunity scolding with a murmur that means, "We were all here, we all saw." The day is less crooked now. Light joke 1. You privately award the reeve 1 imaginary star on his customer service of justice profile. Stocks sit at the edge of the square with the sullen patience of furniture that remembers ankles. A boy whispers that last week a goat occupied them, for practice, and you decide that is a story the town deserves. The reeve doesn't reach for the stocks today. Fines will do, and a stern word lasts longer than splinters when both parties have stalls to mind. Still, the sight of that wood gives your wrists a little sermon about impulse control. You adjust your hood and your conscience at the same time. A clerk arrives with his pen like a tiny lance and writes the verdicts into the town book, cradle of future arguments. He scrapes a mistake with a knife and smooths the page with a crumb of pumice, restoring surface and dignity in one motion. Quirky tidbit to store next to the lavender. Some towns use tally sticks for debts, split lengths of wood notched with amounts, then broken so each party keeps a matching half. The wood grain prevents sneaky additions later. It's accounting that understands trees. You picture the beetles sighing, "Bring me your sticks," and try not to enjoy the phrase too much. The reeve moves the court inward, into the hall, for cases that need walls. You step in with others, feet soft on rushes sprinkled with something that claims to be mint. The hall smells of smoke and wax and the long breath of gossip. A bailiff calls names. A woman brings a complaint about a neighbor's pigs treating her garden as a salon. The law is less about high crimes than about daily frictions. Drainage that disrespects a lower door. Thatch that strays too cozy toward a chimney. A fence that quietly migrates. This is the part of justice that keeps mornings possible. The reeve's questions are short, like bread cut for children. Did you warn him? Were the pigs ringed? Can a fence tell the truth when it's been on a walk? He fines the pig owner, not punitively, but precisely enough that pigs will reconsider future engagements. The woman leaves with soothed eyebrows. You feel a tender respect for rules that remember gardens. Somewhere behind you, the barber surgeon you nearly hired earlier, hello again, leech enthusiast, answers a summons about a bite in last night's tavern. He testifies that the teeth in question were human, which has legal implications beyond ow. The reeve assigns compensation. The biter's ears redden in a manner that promises better self-management around ale. You add a private corollary to your survival manual. When you can choose between a bench and an argument, choose the bench. A debate skims across your thoughts as the clerk's quill squeaks. Were medieval courts mostly fair, or mostly the feudal cosplay our dramas love? Lords booming, peasants doom-scrolling their lives into forfeiture? Historians still argue whether town jurisdictions delivered rough, community-minded justice with surprising consistency, or whether power bent the reed more often than not. Today, you see both, rules kneading behavior into shape, and people watching to keep the kneading from turning into punching. A man with a cap that aspires to authority cites hue and cry. If you see a crime, you shout and run, and neighbors must shout and run too, forming an impromptu net woven of legs and lungs. If the net fails, somebody pays a fine for letting the cry die. You remember chasing a thief last summer until the cobbles argued with your shoes. You lost him, but gained 3 friends who still wave like conspirators. The law can be a community theater with chase scenes. On the wall hangs a faded notice about sanctuary. The church's open door rewriting the map if a desperate body gets inside. A quarrelsome soul who reaches the altar can claim a pause, sometimes a negotiated exile instead of a noose. Mercy by architecture. It reminds you of last winter when a boy ducked into the porch after a bread theft born from hunger, and the parson brokered restitution and work instead of spectacular justice. The stocks had sulked for days afterward, feeling underemployed. Light joke too. You mentally pat the stocks and promise them a nice polish if they continue their streak of irrelevance. Outside again, a sergeant measures a cartwheel to the town's width rules. too broad and ruts the street, too narrow and cuts it like a knife. Law is geometry with feelings. He chalks a mark, gives the carter a week to fix it. And everybody pretends this is leniency rather than the practical reality of a carter's purse. The reeve, done for the moment, finds you with his gaze like a broom. He remembers last month's minor quarrel you had with a rope that declined to pay market tolls because it was just passing through. He asks if you intend to file a complaint against the fishmonger for nearly baptizing your shoes. You weigh the question like a loaf in your palm. Speaking up feels correct. It also feels like earning yourself a place on someone's mental list. You opt for the middle path, the one that avoids both martyrdom and resentment. Not today, you say. We weighed the matter already. He nods, writes nothing, moves on. You feel both brave and cowardly, and accept the paradox like weather. Mainstream Assize strolling by with dignity. Many towns practiced amercements, fines, at the mercy of the court, scaled to offense and capacity. Not designed to ruin but to teach. The system was imperfect, leaky as a thatch in hard rain, but it aimed at keeping neighbors narratable to one another. You leave with the sense that the hall didn't just punish. It trimmed the town's hedges so paths stayed passable. Near the door, a posting warns of night passwords. Today's candle, countersign safe. You practice the exchange under your breath so you won't answer. Loaf, out of habit when startled. A boy watches you rehearse and grins like a sparrow. Light joke 3. You consider asking the reeve to make the password, I am not suspicious at all, but you suspect that would shorten your evening considerably. On your way back toward your lane, you pass the stocks again. A cat has adopted the bench as a nap zone, transforming punishment furniture into a cushion advertisement. 2 girls plait rushes into a crown and measure each other for ruling the yard with kindness. You admire their policy platform. Your feet find your street by memory. The square behind you returns to sales and errands and the low hum of practical peace. You're grateful for rules that prefer fines to bruises, for a reeve with a nose that can smell dishonest fish, for a clerk who smooths pages back to unwrinkled truth. You are equally grateful for your own quiet decision to let one small slight evaporate instead of rain all afternoon. You pat your purse, lighter but law-abiding, and your lavender sachet, industrious as ever. The bell distant as a thought marks another slice of day. You've been measured by weights, watched by eyes, steadied by rules, and spared the stocks by luck and your cautious feet. That will do. That will carry you toward water and a rinse and the happy, ordinary freedoms of people who did not get themselves written into the town book today. You follow your nose toward water, which is to say you follow the day's itch toward mercy. The lane leans downhill to the conduit where a stone basin collects spring-fed patience, and the air around it smells like metal, moss, and whatever stories people rinsed off a few minutes ago. You touch the rim, cool, slick, and let your hands learn the temperature before your face negotiates. A quick splash wakes skin from workshop hours. A second splash persuades it to forgive you. You cup water, pour it along your wrists where the comfrey salve has settled like a well-behaved guest, and feel ache step back one polite pace. If fortune's in the mood, the bathhouse will have fire today. You tip a coin into the conduit keeper's box, because pipes have tempers and bribes soothe, and angle toward the alley with steam ghosts drifting out of it. The bathhouse is a rectangle of generous intentions. A furnace at one end that mutters in brick, a pair of tubs for hotter and cooler, benches along the walls for untying knots in laces, in hair, in conversation. You've brought your bundle: linen cloth, sliver of soap that remembers tallow and ash, a sprig of rue for optimism, and that little vial of Four Thieves vinegar for courage in crowds. The keeper, a woman whose eyebrows run the establishment like foremen, assigns you a seat with a nod that means, "You again, try not to drown." You slip behind a screen, loosen your day until it's a pile, and wrap yourself in linen that never pretended to be modesty's rival, but does fine work anyhow. In the warm room, breath slows without being asked. Steam writes cursive on the air. Somewhere a bucket hisses as it meets water that will not be bullied. Light joke 1. You decide the steam is literate and currently composing a letter of recommendation for your pores. Soap lathers with the grudging friendliness of fat that has become philosophy. You work it into scalp and sleeve ends, along the places where loom dust and market arithmetic cling. You tip a little vinegar into the rinse and breathe in herbs. Rosemary's memory, lavender's soft sermon, thyme's tidy brightness. The scent climbs a ladder inside you and opens a hatch in your head where drafts used to whistle. You rub your linen cloth in small circles the way grandmother taught. Toward the heart, she said, so everything you want to keep finds its way home. A mainstream fact steps into the warm room and doesn't fog the glass. Many medieval towns hosted public bathhouses, stews, where people rented hot water and company by the hour. Customs varied, men certain days, women others, mixed in some places at some times, and not at all elsewhere when councils got alarmed about morality dissolving in steam. In some cities, bathhouses clustered along rivers, wood piles stacked like modest mountains beside their doors. You look at the keeper's wood and silently thank the unseen hands that turn trees into today's comfort. Your fellow bathers are a chorus of sighs and whispered opinions. A baker unwraps a bandage to show a burn that looks less furious than yesterday. A carpenter soaks splinters into surrender. An old woman with hair like soft smoke tells a girl how to pin a veil that respects wind. The talk is low, the jokes gentler than street corner wit. Historians still argue whether bath-going waned sharply after later plagues due to fears of open pores admitting illness, or whether the habit limped along stubbornly in many towns despite sermons and scolds. Right here, under this roof, habit feels alive. Hot water as treaty, soap as witness, steam as mediator. Quirky tidbit to pocket before it drips away. Some bathkeepers lend bath hats, felt caps to keep heads cool in hot rooms, and wooden sandals to spare tender souls from floors that remember the furnace too well. The caps make everyone look like a congregation of cautious mushrooms. You accept both hat and pattens and immediately feel like you belong to a club you didn't know you joined. You sit on the bench's edge and pour warm water down your back from a dipper with a ladle's patience. A friend, well, neighbor ally in the guild of survival, offers to scrub the shoulder you can't reach. In return, you rinse the soap from her hair with a care practiced on pots and infants. It is a small economy of trust. Light joke 2. You both agree not to report each other to the parish if the scrubbing produces angelic singing noises. Scents in this room are a parliament. Soap, wet wool waiting on pegs, a bracket of herbs drying near the furnace, the faint copper of the conduit water. Your rue sprig sits on the bench like a security guard. A girl sells posies at the door, nosegays to hold under the nose during busy moments on narrow streets. You buy one bound with thread, the color of patience. The world will smell like mint and mercy for at least an hour after you leave. You note that privacy here is a choreography, not a wall. Screens and angles, turned backs and practiced glances. You perfect the art of looking at the tile grout with grave interest when anyone wraps their shift. The keeper circulates like a benevolent hawk, shooing horseplay toward the door and reminding the furnace boy that logs do not leap into their destiny without help. The hot tub sighs as more water is added. The cool tub makes promises to disgruntled skin. A barber appears with a basin, announced by steel flashing like boastful fish. He is licensed to bleed in the corner for those who've purchased a diagnosis and the idea of balance. You consider and decline. Your humors can argue later over bread. He shrugs, trims someone's nape, and leaves after washing his razors with a seriousness that earns your precise respect. He will tell people tomorrow that cleanliness is good for business. You will tell people tomorrow that clean skin makes the world easier to carry. As you scrub, you inventory. Flea bites downgraded to footnotes, the scratch honey-kissed and well-behaved, the loom bruise shifting from sermon to anecdote. You pour one last dipper over shoulders. The water a perfect sentence ending with a period. Then the cool tub, brief, bracing, so your skin remembers edges before cloth returns. You pat dry with linen that earns its keep daily, dress in layers now less argumentative, and finger comb your hair with that small wooden comb that keeps society orderly among strands. At the bench of small luxuries, you spend 2 coppers on a twist of perfumed oil, the amount that says, "I exist," without announcing it to the bishop. A single green almond, sugared, becomes a holiday in miniature that dissolves on your tongue. The keeper sells a cup of posset, warm milk and ale flirting under nutmeg, and you cradle it like a newborn mood. Light joke 3. You immediately become the kind of person who says, "I can absolutely taste the nutmeg," and you absolutely can't. On the wall hangs a rules board scolded into the wood. No dice in the hot room, no singing after compline, no bringing fish to soak for any reason. You salute the last one for specificity. Outside, a boy rings a handbell. Closing soon for scrubbing floors, resetting benches, scouring tubs with sand and vinegar until they smell like diligence. You thank the keeper with a nod and a prayer in the liturgy of coin. Street air meets you with new terms, cooler on rinsed skin, sharper through rosemary's ghost, kinder because you are. The bathhouse breath clings to you like a clause in a sentence you want to reread. You tuck your vinegary vial back into the scrip, smooth your hood, and notice how your own scent reads today. Clean wool, honest smoke, a sliver of time. People read each other here the way they read weather. Today you broadcast approachable instead of survived a barrel. That's worth a copper and an hour. A thought pads alongside you like a cat. How often did people bathe, really? Letters, sermons, ordinances, and expense accounts throw mixed light. Your grandmother swore by weekly if the woodpile allowed. Your friend's aunt swears by, when I scare myself. Historians still argue whether linen laundering stood in for full immersion most days, with baths for occasions, or whether towns with conduits and fuel saw more frequent stews than tidy myths allow. You decide frequency matters less than this fact. You feel reset, and reset will help you survive supper, curfew, and the watch's questions with fewer sharp answers. You pass the conduit again, leave room for someone else's hands, and head home lighter by grime, heavier by small contentment. The cat asleep in the stocks hasn't moved. Its morality tale continues to nap. Your rue sprig winks in your hood. Your posy tells your nose a better version of the world. The day keeps tugging forward, but your skin doesn't object anymore. And that, as much as bread or law or bells, is a kind of luck you can pour over yourself and call it grace. You carry the afternoon like a careful tray. The bathhouse warmth still hums on your skin, but the sun has tilted just enough to remind you that daylight is a currency with terrible interest rates. Time to tally, to mend, to put names to objects before dusk borrows them for a moment. You set your bundle on the table, loaf, cloth L, candles that promised good behavior, salves with optimistic labels, and begin the small liturgy of counting. First, the ironware, hook, poker, trivet, ladle. You touch each like taking attendance in a classroom of metal personalities. Next, the cordage, the new strap from the cobbler, punched true. 2 spare lengths of hemp line, 1 sulky bit of twine that believes in knots you don't. You chalk a mark on a small board as each item answers. The board is your domestic chronicle, smudged lines of things that came home and things that left without forwarding addresses. Light joke 1. You consider awarding the poker Employee of the Month, and then remember it's unionized with the tongs. Bread sits in its cloth like a quiet promise. You weigh it the way you weigh favors, by feel, by habit, by experience that can tell 6 ounces from 7 without needing to say the numbers out loud. You slide a heel into the scrip as travel rations for the late errands. The rest goes to the cool crook between wall and chest. The fish you bought stares like it wants to file a complaint. You promise it a pan before its soliloquy begins to rhyme. Vinegar and rosemary get a shelf together, the cupboard's herbivorous department. Honey and comfrey a shelf above, sweetness and repair sharing a bunk. You spool the gifted thread from the tailor's mistress around a sliver of reed and smile at the neatness. Mending is the town's unofficial sport. Cuffs learn humility, elbows confess wear, hems flirt with cobbles and must be chaperoned. You set out needle, beeswax for the thread, a patch harvested from an older shirt that retired with dignity. The linen sighs, grateful to be part of a second act. You run the thread across wax. It emerges obedient, less likely to make birds' nests where your patience lives. You stitch with small bites, seam allowances like whispered apologies to future you. Repairs turn objects back into friends. On the bench, the strap. You marry it to the bundle of tools that has been muttering about slippage. The awl holes you placed earlier are where you left them, small commas in the leather sentence. Buckle, tongue, pull, set. The result looks simple, which is the highest compliment you can pay a repair. You chalk strap fixed on the board and place the chalk back exactly where it belongs, because the chalk believes in assigned seating. Now the numbers part, the bit where you remind yourself that survival is accounting with jokes. You pull the little counting board from under the chest, a wooden rectangle stained with a grid of squares, checkered like a picnic that learned to do math. A purse of jettons, thin counters of brass, clinks. You flick them into columns: bread, fish, cloth, candles, apothecary, alms, bath. Income, day wage promised, thread favor owed, rosemary credit due from the cobbler's wife. The board becomes a map of coin and promise, of today's yes and tomorrow's maybe. A mainstream fact stands at your elbow holding a quill. The English exchequer took its name from a literal checkered table on which officials slid counters to perform calculations of revenue and debt. Merchants and households used similar counting boards and jetons, a tactile arithmetic that turns numbers into choreography. You dance yours into balance with the crease of a smile that is 80% relief. You pick up your split tally stick from the pegs, a slender length of willow notched with rent paid, charcoal purchased, 2 hens traded last month for a mending spree. Your half's notches mate perfectly with the reeve's matching half somewhere in the hall's safe. The wood grain is a lock against forgery. You add a tiny nick for today's conduit tip and another for the bath. The stick smells startlingly of river even now. Quirky tidbit to slide between pages. Tally sticks are so good at being receipts that some places will cling to them for centuries. Rumor says a distant treasury once tried to burn old sticks and warmed the whole building more enthusiastically than intended. You resolve to keep yours away from charmingly symbolic hearth gestures. Your ink leaf comes out for the niceties. Ink can do that, notches can't. A quick note to yourself about the chandler's goodwill wick. A reminder to ask the scrivener for a neater hand on the lease copy before quarter day. The letters slant like hurrying people. You blot with sand and blow. Light joke too. You inform the ink it may dry at its leisure so long as its leisure is now. As you write, a thought taps. Who keeps these books mostly? Historians still argue whether household accounts in towns were chiefly a woman's province or broadly shared, whether literacy and numeracy were pocketed in guilds and cloisters or spread through markets and kitchens faster than our clichés admit. You know this much. On your street, capable hands hold quills regardless of who wears the mantle on Sundays. From the chest, you lift the little cloth purse that guards the "don't touch unless fire, famine, or taxes" fund. You count the good silver with a ritual that borders on affection. A clipped penny you keep for teaching. 2 groats with faces rubbed smooth by argument. A halfpenny that insists on hiding. You put them back and tie the string so your future self has to really want it. Then the everyday purse, thinned by market day but still breathing, gets a knot you can undo in the dark. Hinges squeak a report about the door. You oil them with a breath of tallow because squeaks are how doors practice becoming scandals. The broom glances pointedly at rushes that acquired opinions while you were away. You sweep in lazy, even pushes, coaxing crumbs and splinters into a tidy hill that will make excellent kindling when thoroughly humiliated. The clean floor looks like a solved equation. Your shoulders feel 1 degree lighter. A knock. The cobbler's wife for her rosemary sprig. You pass it over. She passes back news. Her cousin saw a peddler with glass beads that catch light like lakes. You owe her nothing now. She owes you nothing. The ledger, however, purrs at the symmetry. You notch nothing. Generosity is an entry only sometimes category, and chalk beads on the board under luxuries that pretend to be necessities. Light joke 3. You add another pie to the same list and then cross it out to model virtue. The fish receives the pan it was promised. You lay it on a bed of onions that resign themselves to nobility and douse the whole with a streak of your new vinegar. A clove in the mortar gets bruised into fragrance. You scatter the result with a gravity that suggests you do this daily, and not, in fact, once in a while when fortune winks. Heat argues the fish into tenderness, while you stitch the last 3 centimeters of a sleeve that had thoughts about freedom. You taste sauce, add a pebble of salt, and feel like you might forgive the market its arithmetic after all. You take stock of fuel. 3 good logs, a basket of kindling, a conspiracy of shavings courtesy of the joiner's generosity. You bank a little for later, night and its long appetite, and promise yourself to ask the charcoal burner about prices before the week hides. The window admits a calmer light, the kind that slides over surfaces instead of interrogating them. Your tools gleam in places tools like to gleam. Your list shrinks visibly. Satisfaction, a small-boned creature, curls up on the sill. A debate strolls through your head wearing numbers as jewelry. When did Arabic numerals start to win the day-to-day fight over Roman ones here? You've seen both. Tallies, 3 and 7 scrawled on doors, and, increasingly, 4s and 7s that move faster across a page. Historians still argue whether ordinary townsfolk adopted Hindu Arabic numerals widely before printers made them fashionable, or whether merchants led while household ledgers lagged. Your counting board doesn't care which shapes you draw so long as the bread lasts until the next loaf is hot. Outside, shadows lengthen in thoughtful increments. You step to the lane to air the room of steam and vinegar and triumph, propping the door with a brick that has retired from being part of a kiln. Neighbors pass and exchange the late afternoon half-smile that means, "We're all keeping it together with string and jokes." You reach up to take in the wash line of smalls, linen cooling like modest flags, and you think about how clean cloth is its own kind of wealth, an invisible coin that buys you comfort at bedtime and credibility at market. Back at the board, you draw a line through the day so far. Water, done. Fire, alive. Bread, secured. Guild, navigated. Market, endured. Church, breathed. Labor, completed. Health, addressed. Law, survived. Washing, renewed. Tally, balanced. Repairs, stitched. It looks impressive in a column. You resist adding, did not punch anyone, though it deserves honorable mention. The bell mutters a soft measure you recognize as the afternoons shrug toward evening. You gather the jetons, sweep the counting board, hang the tally stick back on its peg like a small, respectful sword. The table clears to a clean top for supper arrangements. The needle returns to its cushion, the wax to its wrap. Nothing is special, everything is crucial. An inventory that is also a prayer. You close the cupboard with a hand that smells faintly of rosemary and honest work. A last look around. Straps taut, hems obedient, candles persuaded, coins counted, debts not ignored. The room looks like it could pass inspection by a grandmother, a beadle, and a saint. 3 different rubrics, same high standards. You breathe the satisfaction into your shoulders, a slow slide of weight that says you have made order in a world that insists on improvisation. Shadows lean longer. You pocket your posy against the street's more aggressive fragrances and step toward the threshold. Ready to trade your afternoon arithmetic for evening's kinder grammar. Neighbors, gossip, mutual aid, the human glue that keeps your tallies from feeling like chains. The door closes behind you with a click that sounds, for once, like applause. You step into the lane at the hour when shutters behave like eyelids, half open, half resting, and doorsteps become living rooms. Neighbors appear the way stars do. 1, then 3, then enough to rearrange the sky. You bring your loaf's heel, a spool of thread, and the kind of listening that makes other people feel clever. A child chalks a grid on the cobbles for a hopping game. 2 women compare bruises from barrels as if they were weather reports. The joiner's dog does rounds as if he's responsible for morale. You lean your shoulder to a jam and let the block's slow news drift over you. The mill pond's low, a cousin's returned with a hat too proud for its head. Someone's hen has learned to open latches and is being congratulated and scolded in equal measure. Trade begins, quiet, unpriced, familiar. You hand over the cobbler's extra nail and receive a darning needle in a sheath of folded paper. Careful, she says, this one has ambitions. You pass a sprig of rosemary to the beadle's daughter whose cough has been trying to get promoted. She trades a length of clean rush cord you didn't know you needed until you hold it. Light joke 1. You start to suspect the entire street is a shop where nobody lets you pay properly. Favors loop like twine around wrists. No one keeps full books because everybody keeps partial ones, and together, that's enough. A mainstream fact settles on the step politely. Godparenthood, godsib, kin and God, binds streets as tightly as blood. People choose sponsors for their children not just for piety, but for network. Allies in crisis, extra hands at harvest. A more forgiving audience when a goat has artistic ideas about your roof that Sunday. The word gossip will, in time, slide from God sibling to friend at the cradle to news with personal seasoning. Tonight, it wears all three meanings at once. You pass the heel of bread to your child's godsib and receive in return the latest rumor about cheaper charcoal up the road, transmitted with the solemnity of Scripture and the delight of mischief. A neighbor limps up with a stool and a request. Could your all ask his shoe a few questions? You fetch it and perform the ceremony of small rescue. New hole, new tie, new confidence. He pays you in a wedge of cheese wrapped in a scrap of linen that smells faintly of the cow's opinion. Across the way, a woman braids a rushlight and shares the trick of soaking the rope in salt to make it burn slower. Wisdom travels from hands to mouths and back to hands again. Historians still argue whether these women's economies, fetching, borrowing, nursing, lending, formed the backbone of urban survival, or simply filled gaps the guild rolls ignore. Looking down the lane where supper happens in installments and childcare is a rotating office, you'd vote backbone with your whole chest. You join a little council around the threshold where 3 stools become a parliament. Tokens lie in the middle, buttons for one topic, pebbles for another, because everyone's brain has been working since dawn and prefers props. Scott ale at the parish next week, someone says. Those community fundraisers where you pay a small Scott, tax, and drink ale brewed for the cause until the church roof feels safer, and spirits likewise. Confraternity dues on Monday, says another. Those semi-guild religious clubs that keep candles lit and funerals decent and neighbors mutually answerable. The joiner offers softly to fix Elsbeth's door for nothing, and the block shifts around the gift like a flock making space. Light joke 2. You propose a dues category labeled good gossip, because surely we should fund what we're best at. The talk's rhythm is soft shoe. Complaints without sharpened edges, plans that aren't yet laws, jokes that keep heat gentle. A boy dashes in with a split tally. He and the baker's apprentice are settling a week of minor chores. The notches match when the stick is fitted back together, and it's as satisfying as a riddle solved. Someone tells the story of last year's beating of the bounds, when half the parish walked its borders with willow wands, thwacking landmarks so children would remember the shape of home with their shins. That memory still glows in ankles and in laughter. A quirky tidbit jumps on the bench and waves. There's a local ale tester, an ale conner, who checks brew quality by pouring a puddle on a wooden bench, sitting in it in leather breeches, and then standing. If his breeches stick, the sugar's right. If not, the brewer hears about it in unmusical detail. Is that your town or a neighbor's? It hardly matters. The story travels because it's delightful and because it makes honesty look like slapstick. You resolve not to offer your own breeches for science unless the pay includes a pie. Someone raises a hand like a lantern. Night watch rota? 2 names for the week, posted at the well, passwords practiced until even half-sleep remembers. Candle. Safe. The old women remind the young men that the watch is ears first, then feet, then staff. A fight prevented is a better story than a bruised parade. Another voice folds in. We need a new rope for the well. The last one thinks it's a snake. Subscriptions are pledged in farthings, thread, and the promise of a morning's labor, because money is only one flavor of generosity, and not always the tastiest. From a window above, a lute sighs into a tune that remembers last midsummer's dancing. You let your head find the beat on the jam. The girl with the time salutes you with her pot. You salute with your darning needle and try not to look like you're domestically armed. A small child gifts you a pebble, for luck. You accept as if coins were obsolete and pebbles had just been minted. Light joke 3. You pocket it like state treasure and immediately forget which pocket. Under the talk is an older instrument, a bass line of mutual aid that rarely solos. Someone mentions churching, meals and little gifts for a woman after childbirth to welcome her back to the pew and the doorstep. Someone else mentions the mortuary cloth, mended again so it can serve another neighbor when needed, and your throat edits itself. These rituals say what money cannot keep saying all day. You are not alone. Historians still argue whether medieval neighborhoods were more riot than refuge, full of lawsuits and slander with only a crust of kindness on top, or whether the drumbeat of cooperation, at wells, ovens, vigils, funerals, was the real music. Tonight, the music carries. You walk a tool across to a door that sticks and watch the joiner teach the wood one more hinge of humility. God pay you, the woman says, the old phrase that means, if I can't, may somebody. You return to your threshold and find a basket you didn't leave there. 2 apples, 3 plums, a note that reads like a shrug. Too many. You know exactly whose tree is too generous for its ladder. Gratitude will be routed tomorrow in thread, in help stacking wood, in praise shouted very near her window. A boy struts through on stilts that add dignity and 30 seconds of terror to his life. The block applauds. 2 teens rehearse a playlet for the next parish pageant, St. Nicholas rescuing debtors, with a fish that refuses to be a purse until the second try. The entire street offers notes. The fish takes a bow. You join the applause and add a suggestion about a larger purse. The director accepts it as if you paid for the new rope outright. From further down, a Charivari memory tries to get invited. Pots and pans once banged under a window when a husband behaved like a donkey. The community's noisy way of saying, course correct. You feel the ambivalence. Noise can be justice and cruelty wearing the same hat. You say nothing, and the story dissolves into a safer joke about a goat that once wore a wreath like a magistrate. You admire neighbors who steer the conversation toward kindness without announcing that they're steering. The sun leans on the western roofs. Shadows pool under carts. Someone passes a cup, posset with spice or thin ale with civility, and it tastes like agreement. A small procession peels off to carry soup to an old man who stages his days from a bed near a window. Your hands go automatically to lift, balance, wipe the drip that would annoy him. On the way back, you pause at a door where a new mother sleeps. Her sister takes your loaf heel with glassy gratitude and a smile that blinks slowly, like a cat forgiving the universe. You step quietly, because quiet is the most valuable coin right now. By the time you rejoin your threshold, the lane has rehearsed for night. Tools tucked, gossip cooled, plans posted to doorways with string and wax. You redo a knot on your strap, a neighbor's gift taught by another neighbor's hands. You tuck the pebble deeper as if it might mature into a coin. The block has held you up for an hour and change, and you feel taller for it. Your problems haven't vanished. They've been divided by a number greater than 1. You move toward the lamplighter's approaching pool of gold, the password steady in your mouth, the watch's rota posted in your head, your god Sib's laughter in your pocket next to the lucky stone. When the bell mutters the next measure, the whole street seems to say we heard it together. That is not nothing. That is the math of surviving one medieval day. Borrow a tool, pass a rumor, lend a hand, be a stitch in a fabric that refuses to unravel just because evening has opinions. Supper finds you the way dusk always does, by degrees, with a soft hand on your shoulder and a question about whether you've earned your appetite. You set the pot on the trivet like a crown on a patient head. The hearth breathes. The day rearranges itself around flame and bowl. Your pottage, today upgraded with those market fish who were threatening to compose, accepts onion, a sprig of rosemary you smuggled past your better judgment, and a ladle of yesterday's stock that has been practicing being flavorful in the corner. The steam that rises is not negotiable. It tells your ribs to make room for comfort. Bread joins the ceremony, cloth unwrapped with reverence fit for minor miracles. You score the loaf with a pocket knife that has earned a retirement and refuses to take it. The crust reports back in pleasant crackles. Tiny applause for getting here. You place the salt, just a pinch, treated like a distinguished guest, and a wedge of the cheese your limping neighbor pressed into your hand. The table is small, but it holds. Bowl, knife, spoon, bread, a cup that smells faintly of bees. Light joke 1. You invite dignity to dinner. It sends regrets, but allows bread to attend as its representative. The room's light tilts toward lamplight, toward the way flame makes edges kinder. In that gentler geometry, you notice small repairs accomplishing big magic. The hem you stitched at noon no longer snags your patience. The strap behaves like it chose you. The hinge sighs instead of squeaks when you open the cupboard. Even the fish has reconciled itself to being supper rather than a story. You break the bread in the way your grandmother taught, crosswise, then again, and set the trenchers, thick slices meant to shoulder stew. Later, when they've done their duty, they will become someone else's course. Nothing in this house retires early. You spoon pottage onto the waiting bread. Watch the gravy pledge itself to crumb. A mainstream fact settles at your elbow, polite as ever. For much of medieval Europe, supper is often pottage and bread, sometimes a sliver of meat or fish when purse and season allow, with ale or small beer to keep water's temperament in line. Feast and fast days braided through the week nudge menus, fish on Fridays, oil instead of animal fat in certain seasons, meat when the calendar smiles and your conscience signs off. You sip small ale and let the truth of that pattern land where hunger does its counting. The first mouthful makes you close your eyes like a prayer that forgets to ask for anything. The rosemary blooms, the onion resigns its sharpness, the fish yields in polite flakes. You pass the bowl to the godsib who slipped in with a loaf heel and a grin. She returns it with a refill and a story about a pig that learned passwords for the night watch and now enjoys free range of the alleys. Light joke 2. You picture the pig answering candle and the watch whispering safe, then both agreeing not to tell the reeve. On the table sits the salt, aloof in its little cellaret. There's a whole theater to salt. Who sits above the salt in a great hall? Who gets the good pinch? How a cellar's position once mapped status like a compass. Here, in your room, salt is just precious and persuasive. But you still set it where elbows can't bully it. A quirky tidbit joins the place setting. Many folks carry their own spoons, tucked at the belt or in a little case, because personal cutlery is friend and guarantor. You don't trust every tavern's drawer, but you trust your spoon the way you trust your comb. Yours is wood, smoothed by 1,000 circles through stew. The handle darkened where your thumb has told stories for years. Outside, the lamplighter's pool of gold reaches your window. Inside, the hearth throws back an answer. Shadows lengthen like slow cats. You open the shutter just enough to let evening smell the rosemary, then shut it to keep the beetle from smelling opportunity. The pottage gains depth with every minute it refuses to boil. You tip in a whisper of sour from the vinegar of the 4 thieves, not enough to boss the room, just enough to remind sweetness to mind its manners. Your posy on the sill announces that time out sings fish. The room votes aye. News arrives as it always does. Through the door, carried by feet that mean well. A neighbor with a cough auditions your posset mug. A child returns the lucky pebble you loaned by dropping, now upgraded with a chalk star and a solemn oath that it defeats monsters under beds. You press the trenchers onto plates and invite hands to break, dip, share. The bowl travels clockwise because counterclockwise invites taxes you've decided. Light joke 3. You inform the room you're waiving the trencher service fee tonight. The room applauds in crumbs. Between mouthfuls, your mind does a small inventory of beliefs and bellies. Historians still argue whether meat for townsfolk was truly rare, celebratory and occasional, or whether small scraps in daily stews added up to more protein than moralists like to admit, especially where rivers offered fish and streets offered pigs with ambiguous boundaries. Tonight you've got fish because the market had opinions and your purse cooperated. Last week there was only cabbage and a heroic onion. Next feast, if luck smiles, you'll lay a slice of something that once said, "Bah," across the bread and feel like a duke for 4 bites. The cat from the stocks arrives at your sill as if summoned by the smell of democracy. It blinks, yodels, and negotiates entry with the quiet skill of professionals. You surrender a flick of fish, which is the fee you pay to keep the night free of mouse jurisprudence. It eats, judges your seasoning, and curls into a comma near the warmest stone. The godsib ladles seconds with the confidence of someone who believes in the elasticity of soup. Your spoon works a slow orbit. The bowl's tide recedes and returns. You find the cheese, unwrap it, and let its patient scent join the choir. Fresh cheese, white and humble. Aged cheese, sharper than your best comeback. You shave thin pieces with your knife and lay them over hot bread until they blink into softness. The table nods. You think of dairy wandering in and out of diets according to region and purse, of butter that elevates and betrays, of days when oil pretends to be butter because the calendar says so. You think, too, of trenchers traveling at meal's end, given to the poor beside the church door, or fed to a pig with ethics as elastic as rope. Waste is a joke nobody tells here. From the shelf, the little sugar cone you bought at the apothecary gleams with indecent promise. You scrape a few crystals into the posset pot, stir, and pretend you are scandalously wealthy for precisely 20 heartbeats. Sweetness hits tongue and childlike wonder knocks, gentle, polite, hopeful. You resist the urge to write dessert in your ledger as if naming it could make it repeat. You will save the rest for dark weeks and illnesses, and the kind of news that needs a spoonful to go down without argument. Voices ride the corridor outside. Gate talk, watch talk. Someone reciting tomorrow's chores as if incantations keep weather obedient. You tilt your ear to the murmur and add your own to it without leaving the chair. The fire lowers itself into coals with the self-confidence of an old actor who doesn't need applause to nail the final line. Breadcrumbs sketch a constellation on the table. You brush them into your palm and feed them back to a future soup, the economy of galaxies in miniature. After the bowls are clean enough to insult no one, you pour warm water over them, rub with sand, and set them to drain at an angle that would please a mathematician. The spoon gets a final polish on your hem. The knife drinks a lick of oil and sleeps where you can find it in the dark. The cat, bellied and benevolent, chooses your lap for a brief staff meeting about nothing in particular. Your shoulders finally drop the last 2 notches they were reserving for emergencies. On the mantel, the candles you bought at the chandler's behave like citizens. Steady flame, little smoke, no arguments with the ceiling. You grin at their good manners and at the memory of exchanging last week's smoky offenders. In their light, faces look kinder, and so, occasionally, do ledgers. Somewhere a neighbor plays 3 notes on a flute and then laughs, which is exactly the right length for a concert after a long day. You leave a trencher by the door wrapped in cloth, an old habit that says if someone knocks with bad timing and an honest stomach, you can say yes without inventing a miracle. You set aside a spoon of stew for tomorrow's breakfast, because future you has done enough for you today to deserve the favor. You pinch the salt cellar closed, clap the breadcloth tight, and thank the knife aloud just to be odd on purpose. The room understands. By the time the lamplighter's glow moves on, your fire is banked, your belly is fed, your table is tidy, and the air smells of rosemary, bread, and the last brave note of fish refusing to go gentle. You stand, stretch, and feel the day subtract a few ounces. Supper, you decide, is less about fullness than about the brief democracy it offers. 1 pot, many spoons, steam rising like a vote that passes unanimously. Aye to another hour of being alive together. Curfew rolls over the roofs like a drum trying not to wake the baby, and you feel the town take a long collective breath as doors think about being boundaries instead of invitations. You sweep crumbs into your palm, whisper truce to the fire, and pull your mantle close enough to hear the wolves gossip. Outside, the lamplighter makes small constellations at the street's elbows, each wick tongued clean, each flame encouraged with the gentle impatience of a teacher herding vowels. The light puddles aren't day, they're agreements. Stand here, pass there, mind that corner. You lace your hood, check the knot on your purse again, and let the night edit your stride into shorter sentences. The watchman's staff raps twice somewhere ahead, a polite thunder that tells sandals and secrets to move with intent. He calls the hour and the weather. Voice half chant, half yawn. 9 of the clock, a fair sky, which is both information and lullaby. Your mouth rehearses the password as you walk. Candle, safe, until it stops being words and becomes a rhythm you can breathe. At the corner by the tallow-smelling chandler's, a watch pair steps from shadow. Candle? One prompts, and you answer with the countersign you practiced until your tongue owned it. Their faces settle. Your shoulders do the same. Light joke 1. You only nearly say cabbage, which would have gotten you escorted home under a cloud of cruciferous shame. A mainstream fact keeps pace at your elbow. Curfew, couvre-feu, cover the fire, is more than a bedtime rumor. In plenty of medieval towns, a bell or horn marks the hour when shutters close, hearths get banked, street business yields to quiet, and gates shift from welcoming to watchful. The idea is safety, against flame, against riot, against the lazy kind of entropy that finds trouble in unlit corners. Law backs it, sometimes with fines for wandering, sometimes with the official pity reserved for people who insist their errands outrank the clock. You banked your coals, you bank your voice, you cross the square with a quiet that feels like respect instead of fear. Above you, shutters clap into place, and silhouettes shrink to coins of light. A boy lingers a beat too long. His mother's call reels him in like a fish that forgot it lives in a bowl. The lamplighter tips a second flame into a dull lantern until it understands its purpose. In the distance, the gate's bolt runs home with the cozy decisiveness of cutlery returning to a drawer. You aren't trapped. You're tucked. The difference is mostly made of trust and passwords. At a corner shrine, someone has left a candle stub burning in a glass that keeps wind from having opinions. You pause just long enough to let its polite halo comb your nerves. The street performs its nightly magic trick. Smells change order. Smoke first, then clay, then horse. Voices compress. Louder where lamplight pools. Almost swallowed where it doesn't. Your feet choose the lantern-to-lantern route unconsciously, the way rivers choose a path without filing a plan. You step around the slick place near the tanner's wall that never dries. Even the moon refuses to look at it directly. A quirky tidbit jogs your sleeve. Some watches carry wooden clappers or rattles on special nights. A brisk, dry chatter that replaces bells in Holy Week or plays alarm in a fire. Others keep nakers, tiny kettle drums that announce the hour with small thunder. There are even towns where the watch blows a cow horn so the night briefly thinks a herald wandered into a poem. Tonight your men have voices and staves and a faithful dog who takes his job as sniffing magistrate seriously. He confers with your ankle, approves your soap choice, and returns to work. At the top of the lane, you pause and look back. The city has drawn itself in charcoal and gold. A window or two still spills loot practice. Someone's laughter flips like a coin. Somewhere a cart complains that it was promised a stable sooner. You tap your doorframe twice, the superstition that has become punctuation, and feel the wood answer with the quiet thunk of familiarity. You step on, because you still owe night a circuit of the block before you can call your bed straw a homeland. The watch appreciates moving bodies that look like they belong to their feet. Historians still argue whether curfew enforcement genuinely emptied streets or merely rearranged them. Respectable errands inside, small trades and quiet mischief outside. Whether the drumbeat of the watch deterred crime or simply relocated it to more conversational alleys. Your town tonight plays the middle. Fewer voices, slower carts, but also the soft commerce of people who sell warm pies to those who forgot supper and fix buckles for those whose day got away. You nod at a link boy, young, candle-on-a-stick mercenary, who offers to rent you a moving circle of light. You decline. Your route is a necklace of steady lamps, and your purse prefers not to socialize. A shadow detaches from a doorway and becomes a neighbor you know by his hat's regretful tilt. He has a message for the midwife on the next street, and a face that says the child will insist on being born when the clock isn't looking. You walk with him as far as the turn, your posy doing what it can for the air between you. The watchman nods you through with the kind of glance that inventories, and then sets down the list without comment. Light joke too. You consider telling the baby to wait for office hours, then decide to keep your career in obstetrics fictional. Your route passes the gate, now officially a wall. The porter on the inside steps leans on his pike and his boredom in equal measure. You exchange the ritual banalities that keep nights human. Quiet so far? A gull with ambitions. Any news? Tomorrow will probably arrive. He tells you which stretch of lane the watch is grumpiest about. Loose stones, bad angles, and you reroute a little for your ankle's sake. Above, the stars do their slow mathematics, a ledger written too high to audit. You trace the plow and consider writing oxen overhead in your book to confuse future you in the morning. At the well, a small coven of late fetchers works faster than daylight permits. One dip, one lift, no gossip until the buckets kiss the ground. You hold the gate for a woman balancing 2 pails. She thanks you with the exact weight of her gratitude and hurries into the circle of the next lamp. The watchman barks a reminder about lids, and lids appear as if conjured. Water on the street becomes ice in some months and lies in wait for shins. You make a private covenant with balance and proceed like a person who enjoys standing more than falling. Here's a quieter mainstream note to slip into your pocket. In some places, taverns shut at curfew, and alehouse doors must leave their benches outside to discourage lingering. Shutters turn from air vents to second walls, and fire is ordered under cover, literally, so a town sleeps without one roof practicing arson on another. If you listen, you can hear dampened fires making small, contented noises like animals bedded in straw. Your own hearth at home will be a tame planet when you return, ash-banked, ember breathing under its soft blanket. A scrap of song crosses the lane ahead. 2 voices, a third trying harmony and landing on good intentions. You step wide in the spirit of kindness. People sing to keep fear at a curious distance. You pass the parish door, where sanctuary once saved a foolish thief, and where candles, even now, wink like conspirators with mercy. The bell rope inside rests. You feel its imagined weight in your palm, and understand why pulling it is a job reserved for the sure of foot and intention. Near your corner, a man tries to coax his goose home with arguments that do not move a goose. You assist with the ancient technique of walking behind and pretending you have better places to be. The goose, jealous, hurries. The man thanks you with the expansive gratitude of people who mistake accident for plan. Light joke 3. You add freelance goose consultant to your imaginary resume and immediately decline further contracts. Your door receives the key like an answer to a question you remember asking at dawn. Inside, the room feels different under curfew's spell. Edges rounded, shadows domesticated. You set the latch bar. Not like a moat, but like a ribbon tied around the evening. Outside, the watch's staff taps on, counting the hour into thinner slices until it becomes sleep. You stand a moment, ear tilted to the lane, and memorize the pattern of safety. Lamp glow, step, dog's breath, step, distant laugh, silence. It will be the percussion under which you set your night to rights. Before banking the ember deeper, you open the shutter a finger width and let a thread of star quiet in. The city exhales. You do too. Your feet remember every stone. Your hands remember every latch. Curfew didn't trap you. It braided you into the hour's calm. You draw the bolt, whisper the password once for no one, candle, and answer yourself, safe, and discover that, said inside, the words sound less like a rule and more like a lullaby. You let the door settle into its latch sigh and turn to the night's quieter labors, the ones that don't boast but keep a household stitched to the morning. The hearth stares back with the sleepy red eye of a dragon tamed by routine. You kneel, slide ash like a blanket over the ember's bright breath, leaving a thumbprint of glow tucked in the corner. A promise to tomorrow that it won't have to invent fire entirely from scratch. You rake the coals just enough to tame the pop and spit, then set a small pot near the edge so the leftover stew can think about being breakfast without telling anyone yet. The table turns into a staging ground. You lay out tomorrow's tools in a neat procession, knife wiped and oiled, spoon smoothed against your palm, all sheathed so curiosity can't find it with a fingertip. The darning needle parked in its folded paper sleeve like a sleepy knight. The strap you repaired gets a ceremonial tug. It answers with the confidence of leather that has re-signed its contract. Light joke 1. You award it Employee of the Night and hear the tongs mutter about favoritism. By habit, you walk the room clockwise, rehoming objects that have drifted, salt-lidded, bread re-wrapped and tucked in the cool corner, the vinegar corked and elevated above cat height, the sugar cone, treasure masquerading as kitchenware, nested deep as if thieves specialize in condiments. You shake rush crumbs from the tablecloth out the door and listen to the street accept them without comment. On the sill, your posy leans tiredly. You trim a brown edge, and the mint forgives the day. A mainstream fact rises with the steam from your kettle. Night was work too. In towns and farms alike, tasks slipped past curfew, spinning by firelight, carding wool, mending harness, scouring pots with sand, baking at midnight so loaves greeted dawn. Accounts and illuminations alike show evening hours sown with labor, not idleness. A household's ledger doesn't sleep just because the sun does. You seat yourself with a basket of linen like a clerk with a pile of honest crimes to process. The rip you ignored at noon becomes a narrow mouth you stitch closed with tiny bites of thread. Beeswax keeps the line from snarling. Your fingers muscle memory their way through hem and cuff, and a seam that swears it didn't mean to open. You split a twig for kindling with your knife and think of tally sticks, of the checkered board you swept earlier, of numbers that still hum in your head. You scratch tomorrow's list on your leaf of paper, mark it smalls, guild errand, ask the chandler about those wicks again in case they remember bad habits, return the awl if the cobbler calls for it, and dot each line with a sand grain so the ink minds its business. The script leans a little. The candle's breath pushes it toward elegance, and you pretend it worked. From the peg by the door, you lift your turn shoes, cradle them like small, stubborn animals, and rub tallow into their seams, so tomorrow's puddles have to work for their victory. The pattens get a look for loose pins. You tighten one with the self-satisfaction of a person who just protected their future ankles. The little wooden comb runs through your hair with the brisk tenderness of a friend who tells you when a leaf is stuck behind your ear. You oil the comb because wood appreciates being appreciated. Quirky tidbit to lay beside the comb. Some folks keep night letters, slender slips of parchment or wax tablets tucked by the bed, to catch thoughts that arrive only when candles are low and courage is cheap. The wax tablet earns its keep with a stylus and a thumb. Write, smooth, write again. The mind's chalkboard before paper becomes ordinary. You don't own a tablet, but you make a mental note to ask the scrivener about a scrap of wax next time coins, and luck agree. You lift the small chest where the fire, famine, or taxes fund lives, and check for damp or mischief. Neither has visited. The clasp receives a dab of tallow. The hinge thanks you with silence. Your everyday purse gets retied with a knot you can undo asleep, which sometimes you do, to count reassurance more than silver. You tuck the clove from market deeper among the coins. Not because it guards treasure, but because its scent makes austerity smell like planning instead of lack. Light joke too. You wish pennies had noses so they could enjoy it. Then remember pennies already have faces. At the hearth, you set a pipkin of water to temper itself for washing the last chore's fingerprints from your hands. Sand, swirl, rinse, bowl, spoon, knife. Then you dry each with linen and a little pride. You bank the ember again, ash mountain over coal valley, leaving a thin red border like a saint's halo. You set the poker across the fender at a deliberate angle, the household semaphore that says, "Ember alive, do not poke unless you mean it." Your past self has learned to leave messages your future self respects. On the pegboard of your mind, you hang one last decision. Clothes for dawn. You lay tomorrow's kirtle across the bench to warm in the hearth's last kindness. You shake straw out of your mantle so it won't announce your bed's biography to the market. The hood's liripipe coils itself like a cat on the peg. You roll your stockings at their tops so sleepy hands won't have to argue with inside-out emergencies. Historians still argue whether households like yours spun most of their own yarn and wove much of their cloth, or whether town markets supplied the bulk, with domestic spinning filling only gaps. Your street feels like a braid of both. Spinners at doorways, looms in lofts, bolts on stalls, menders in every window's glow. A draft in the corner earns your attention. You kneel with a wisp of wool to find the crack that won the evening. The shutter's pin needs one more twist of cord. You add it, and the room sighs into slightly rounder warmth. The cat from the stocks appears like a sentence fragment in need of a clause. You open the door, it enters, issues an inspection purr, and climbs onto the warmest spot as if hired. You set a tiny saucer at the edge, a spoon of stew, a spoon of good manners. It eats, approves your management, and composes itself into a loaf. You take the tally stick down once more, not to notch, just to hold. The notches are your autobiography in wood. Fish, bath, alms, rope fund. Small days measured in small strokes that lean together into survival. You put it back gently. On the wall, the parish notice about Sunday's procession catches your eye. You pin a sprig of rosemary beside it so you cannot forget. Above the lintel, your little charm, a knotted red thread blessed with nothing but intent, keeps watch. Does it work? It works exactly as well as habits work. It reminds you to be careful, which is a magic of its own. A soft debate pads barefoot across your thoughts. Did people keep first sleep and second sleep as a rule, middle of the night waking for prayer, talk, small errands? Or is that pattern a patchwork of season, trade, and hearthside myth? Historians still argue whether biphasic sleep was universal, or just common enough to leave tracks in letters and sermons. Whatever the truth, you've met the hour between sleeps, and you're not afraid of it. Tonight, you aim for one long river of rest with no island, but you'll take whatever the tide offers. You pinch the candle lower with wetted fingers until the flame bows without tantrum. In the cooler dark, the room's sounds sharpen into kindness. The tick of cooling iron, the ember's little fox breath, the cat's creel as it edits a dream. You set your knife and spoon within reach of the bed because habit turns to ritual faster than you think, and reachable is one of your favorite prayers. On the bench by the bed, you place your shoes with their toes pointing away. So if trouble knocks, you step in the direction of going, not stumbling. You pat the bundle that will be your pillow, spare shift wrapped around a folded cloak, and count the beat of the town beyond the shutter. Distant watch tap, answering watch tap, a door bolt in a rhetorical mood. then blank space where quiet rehearses. You loosen the laces you tied too sternly at noon. You unhook the belt. You keep your linen on because clean linen is warmth and civility even alone. Light joke 3. You tell the straw tick to be kind. It promises to try, which is all you ever ask of straw and people. Before you blow the second candle, you add the small final touches that translate into a kinder morning. A heel of bread in your scrip, a thumb of cheese beside it, your list folded where your hand will find it while your head still argues. The door bar settles into place with a domestic clonk that sounds like safety hiring itself. You try the latch once, and decide not to try it twice because obsession has poor sleep hygiene. Night picks up the room, turns it a degree, and sets it down softer. You slide under the blanket, tuck feet into the pocket where warmth keeps its savings, and let the day file itself. Water, fire, bread, guild, market, church, labor, health, law, washing, tally, neighbors, supper, curfew, chores, each in its labeled drawer, ready to be fetched at dawn without shouting. Your eyes slip shut, and the ember, winking under ash, keeps your place in the story until the bell you renamed cardio with Saint Whoever opens its mouth again. You shake the straw tick like you're negotiating with a rustling crowd. Chaff leaps, then settles. A soft dust of last week's sleep makes a little galaxy in the candlelight before falling as if gravity has opinions about dreams. You drag the mattress, linen sack stuffed with straw that used to be somebody's field, half off the bed frame, then thump it with the flat of your hand until the straw remembers how to be spring instead of memory. You pluck out a burr that rode in from a hayrick like it paid fare. The bed ropes below, criss-crossed hemp that turn a rectangle of wood into something kinder, have loosened. You lean in with the bet tighten, tugging each line in turn until the whole web sings a quieter note. Light joke 1. You tell the ropes to hold their temper. They promise to hold you instead. You lift the bolster, fluff it with persuasive violence, and spread the sheet again, smooth as a prayer. If fortune ever sent you feathers, they live in a small pillow. The mattress remains democratic straw. A mainstream fact sits on the bedpost. For many households, beds are rope-laced frames topped with a stuffed tick, straw, reeds, sometimes flock from wool combing, tightened periodically with a key or strong hands. Curtains hung from a tester or canopy keep drafts and peering eyes honest. Feather beds exist, yes, but mostly for purses that never have to think about cabbage. The shutter lets in a thread of uninvited night. You find the culprit, a pin at the hinge sulking one hole too loose. A twist of your new rush cord persuades it back to cooperation. You hold your palm to the crack to test the draft. The air kisses your knuckles and considers being reasonable. Your hood, now demoted to bedcap, waits to keep scalp and ears out of negotiations with cold. The blanket, wool that believes in you, gets folded back just enough to welcome, not enough to advertise. Now the vermin chapter. You go hunting with tenderness. You crack the bed frame apart at the join, run your cloth along crevices, and talk out loud in the voice of a landlord with policies. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs are not on the lease. Your little vial of vinegar with herbs, rosemary, lavender, thyme, makes the rounds along seams and rope, a scented frontier. On the rush-strewn floor, you pull back the top layer and evict 2 ambitious beetles that tried to claim eminent domain. The cat watches with supervisor energy, tail like a metronome. You approve its job performance with a scrap of cheese you pretended you weren't saving. You hang the bread bag from its peg, high enough that mice must apply for wings. Grain stays in a lidded chest. Meat, if any graces your house tonight, dangles in the cool draft by the window where air is stern and claws can't reach without filing paperwork. The chamber pot, night stool if you're feeling dignified, slides to its corner, lid on, not merely courtesy, but strategy. By the door, you set your shoes on their sides. Rumor says mice dislike the surprise of leather caves at odd angles. The rumor is untested science. The gesture calms you anyway. Quirky tidbit for your museum of bedtime trivia. Some folks sew sprigs of tansy or wormwood into little sachets to tuck near the tick and threshold. Herbal no vacancies signs for fleas and moths. Others chalk protective circles around bed legs or smear a ring of grease to confuse ants who don't read signage. You keep a pinch of rue under the pillow because grandmother said it teaches nightmares better manners, and grandmother's curriculum has never been successfully appealed. You take the warming pan, brass dish on a long handle borrowed from a neighbor who trusts you not to set the world on fire, and fill it with a spoon of ember and ash. Swish it through the sheets until the linen warms like a memory of July, careful to keep ash where it belongs. The air fills with a soft bakery heat. The sheets loosen their stiff courtesy and become, briefly, conspirators. You cap the pan, carry it back like a reliquary, and thank the neighbor silently with every toe that will not mutiny when introduced to bed. Somewhere, a thought knocks with a scholar's cough. Was the phrase "sleep tight" born from ropes you tighten under the tick, or merely a later coinage we like to tuck into the past because it fits so well? Historians still argue whether that bedtime benediction belongs here, beside your rope and key, or whether it's a retrospective joke embroidered onto our picture of medieval beds. Either way, you tighten because you enjoy not falling through your furniture. You take the flea comb to your hair with cruel kindness, then run it along the cat's spine until it sighs itself boneless, and consent pats your wrist. Linen shifts help, washed often enough to keep skin a less inviting in, and the bathhouse you visited earns its keep again. A tin of goose grease sits near the hearth for chapped heels and scandalized knuckles. You rub a smear in and decide your feet are on speaking terms with you again. Light joke 2. Your left heel writes you a thank you note. The right foot adds a postscript complaining about yesterday's plank. The window's leaded glass isn't much of a wall. The shutter is the real defense, plus the curtain drawn round the bed, the little room within the room. You hook the rings along the tester and let the wool hang down 3 sides, making your own weather. Voices outside narrow to muffled coins. The watch's staff counts the hour with polite knocks. A late cart apologizes to stones it can't avoid. You slide the curtain's hem under the tick to keep drafts from rehearsing speeches against your shins. A mainstream Assize sidles in with historical manners. Urban bylaws often tangle with night soil and refuse. No tipping slops from upper windows at hours when heads walk below. Fines for dumping too near the conduit. Rules about storing firewood so rats don't hold festivals. Rat catchers ply honest trade with dogs and traps. Cats keep unofficial hours with measurable results. You've seen the man with the ferret on his shoulder and admired his confidence. You prefer your supervisor cat and your own daily tidiness treaty. You set a little saucer of water by the hearth for sparks that feel athletic. Hang your lamp on the bracket far from fabric, and rehearse the small ritual of knives reachable, door barred, rope tight, curtain drawn, ember banked. You place your purse under the bolster. Coins feel safer when they dream beside your ear. And fold tomorrow's list under the candle so you'll insult fewer mornings by forgetting what you promised yourself at night. Your belt becomes a strap to turn the chest into a more opinionated obstacle. You have no illusions about thieves, but you do enjoy inconveniencing them in theory. You climb onto the bed, then into it, careful of the warming pan's ghost, and let linen adopt you. Your bones set down their toolkits one by one. Breath slows. The cat sees your feet as an invitation to be a quilt. Light joke 3. You inform it that its rent is payable in rodent prevention. It replies by vibrating like a discreet thunderstorm. You pull the blanket to your chin and feel the room reorganize. Hearth as heartbeat, shutter as eyelid, curtain as hug. A debate wanders by with its slippers on. How many bodies share this bed? In your house tonight, it's you and your purring colleague. In many homes, it's spouse, child, cradle nearby. Sometimes a lodger on the trundle. Sometimes 2 friends who split rent and blankets without peering at future historians. Historians still argue whether bed sharing was so common that privacy was a luxury, or whether townhomes managed more separations of space than our tidy myth insists. You know this much. Cold and cost are strong matchmakers. Kindness often has to be scheduled. You listen for Vermin's committee meeting. Silence, then a faint scritch in the wall that might be a mouse filing paperwork. The cat's ear swivels, and then decides the bureaucracy can be handled at dawn. You consider setting a trap tomorrow, a tilting pot propped with a stick, baited with a mercy. Your herbs whisper from their cloth, "Sleep, we've got the perimeter." The curtain moves a breath with your breath. The bed's ropes answer your weight with a good-natured groan that sounds like assent. Before you let go, you recite the little litany of gratitude you keep for straw nights, for the rope that holds, for the neighbor who lends warmth in a pan, for herbs that make insects second-guess their ambitions, for cats who audit the dark, for shutters that remember their job, for hands that repair instead of despairing. You picture morning, your embers' thumbprint of glow, your spoon waiting like a promise, your list folded like a map. If the night wakes you for an island between sleeps, you'll count the knots in the rope and imagine each one a bell rung in your favor. If it doesn't, you'll let the curtain sail you to dawn like a boat on a warm, black sea. The watch taps. The tap returns. The bell makes a sentence of hours. Drafts wander the edges of the room looking for work. The curtain tells them to try next door. Your body considers all its small mended places and begins filing them under solved. You sink, not into straw exactly, but into purpose. Mended, tightened, tucked. And the bed receives you like a craft you've rigged yourself, set for the long glide into the dark. The curtain makes its own little weather, but the night beyond it tugs at you with a fingertip of curiosity. You slide a hand from under the blanket, lift the wool, and open the shutter a cautious palm's width. The lane offers a draft like a cool sip. Stars powder the black in deliberate patterns, and you feel that old, slow awe that belongs to anyone who ever leaned out of a window and let the sky reset their proportions. The watch taps once at the far end, polite thunder, and a dog replies with the bored dignity of an assistant manager. You stay half-wrapped, a ship at anchor, and let your eyes climb. There, North Star, steady as a kept promise, the little bear curving from it like a handle you could almost lift. The great bear sprawled farther off, front paws forever stepping. You trace Cassiopeia's chair with a fingertip in the air. a zigzag throne you would not want to sit in for long. Toward the east, a smudge like a thought you can't quite hold. The Milky Way's river, wide and wordless. You've been taught enough roof lore to make the stars pragmatic. If the plow's bowl tips, frost's likely to drink. If a ring halos the moon, a merchant of rain is already counting coin. Light joke 1. You whisper to the moon, close your purse, and it pretends not to hear. A mainstream fact sits comfortably on the sill. People kept time and season by sky, not just by bells. Mariners steered by Polaris. Monks set night offices with an eye on familiar constellations. Farmers watched Pleiades rise and sink to guess at sowing and reaping. Travelers glanced up as often as down. There were instruments for it, too. Astrolabes that turned heaven into brass geometry, and, for the night watchful, nocturlabes that read hour from the wheel of the little bear around the pole. You don't own one. You own habits. Counting between the watchman's calls, reading cloud bellies, sniffing wind like someone who expects weather to answer questions. You lean farther into the slit of night, cheek against cool wood. Clouds have gone thin and filmy, pulled like linen over a line. High mares' tails streak the darkness. Cirrus that storytellers call angel's hair or traveler's penance. And you taste on the back of your tongue a change, damp hiding behind tomorrow's tongue. The wind is from the west, soft-breathed. Your street smells of banked ash, tannin, cat, and something yeasty you hope is tomorrow's bread and not a bucket having ambitions. Footsteps. The watch returns in a slower meter. You murmur the password to yourself, candle, and answer, safe, because repetition is a lullaby that can hear you. Their lamp throws a slow ellipse up the wall as they pass. Your shutter slit glows, and then forgets. One watchman whistles a scrap of hymn. The other coughs in the way of men who pretend not to be mortal. You picture them dipping bread into pocket ale at the corner shrine, and feel a brief, irrational fondness for strangers who keep your lanes stitched to quiet. You draw the shutter almost closed, and let your eyes reaccustom to bed dark. In the dim, you tell yourself the soft stories that serve as anchors. The first is weather lore, half proverb, half rehearsal. Red sky at night, sailor's delight. Red sky at morning, sailor's warning. You don't sail, but you respect anyone whose roof moves without asking permission. Another, when swallows fly high, fair weather, low, rain on your laundry if you forget you own laundry. The tinier superstitions skitter in too. If the fire hisses in threes, visitors. If the cat washes behind its ears, rain. You glance at the loaf-shaped inspector, who is washing its tail, and therefore predicts nothing but continued self-esteem. Quirky tidbit to lay beside your posy on the sill. Some households hang moon cards, little painted discs to track the month's phases, and swear by planting or hair trimming to the moon's mood. Others keep the windrows chalked by the door so you can salute the right saint when a storm gets opinionated. Your voice lowers itself to whisper, the way voices do when the room teaches them how. You trade stories with yourself the way two friends trade blankets in a cold church. Here, warmer now. There's the one about St. Brendan's boat stitched of leather and prayers. The one about a girl who carried a coal all the way home without letting it die, and married a man whose hearth never failed. The one about will-o'-the-wisps, lantern men, leading fools into bogs if they followed glow instead of sense. You add your own footnote. Follow lamps that move with footsteps, not lights that don't answer when you call. Below the storytelling, a tide of debate slips in and out like a careful fish. How much did ordinary people believe the sky's patterns decided their bread and babies? Historians still argue whether medieval townsfolk consulted astrologers for everything short of washing days, or whether astrology's reach was closer to courtly medicine, academic calendars, and the kind of marriages that required negotiation between stars and purses. You've seen horoscopes chalked small behind shop doors and birth charts folded into marriage chests. You've also seen your neighbors trust wind on their skin more than Mars in a book. You personally accept the sky as counselor, not tyrant. Counselors don't need to be right. They need to help you think. The cat, having signed off on vermin, kneads your calf with bread-making seriousness, then settles. You scratch its chin until the purr smooths out like a well-planed board. Light joke 2. You promote it to Night Watch 2. It accepts with the air of a noble forced to accept a title. You listen again to the lane. Somebody late sets down a bucket more quietly than their character allows. A pigeon mutters a dream that is mostly coo and crumbs. From the far end, a laugh, quickly muffled by a companion's hand. The sound of people remembering that walls are thin and fines are boring. You return to the sky through the seam in the curtain. Orion hasn't risen yet. Too early in this season. But you find his absence companionable. A reminder that winter will arrive when it wants, not when your blanket invites. For now, the summer star scrim hangs wide. The air tastes like a cooled spoon. You count between the lookups, 10 heartbeats, then another 10, then a longer stretch in which you forget to count because the quiet count you. Your eyelids become warm coins, your hands cool on the blanket's hill. Before sleep ambushes you, you walk through tomorrow in whispers, the way you always do when stars have given your brain the patience to be kind. The ember will be there if ash remembers to be thick. Bread heels and cheese thumb, ready. List folded under candle. Chandler question, guild errand, rosemary to the cobbler's wife, ask the scrivener about a wax tablet if coins don't flinch. You tuck a maybe in the seam. Buy a second spoon if the peddler's beads turn out to be glass that refracts your willpower. You picture your route lamp to lamp, daylight to daylight, so morning doesn't have to invent courage from scratch. The wind nudges the shutter. The latch answers with a small cluck that sounds like reassurance. You let your jaw soften, tongue resting against your teeth the way singers teach. The watch calls the hour again. Linens of sound hung evenly along the street. You answer with silence and a slow exhale. Light joke 3. You award yourself Employee of the Month, Respiration Division, and decline the speech. What remains is the last little handful of thought you always toss into the dark like crumbs for good birds. Gratitude's the first. Bell for keeping time, bread for being present, water for being cooperative, hands for obeying their better angels most of the day. Petition's the second. Less blisters, more thread, and if the saints are bored, perhaps a break in onion prices. The third handful is just names. Godsib, neighbor with the cough, lamplighter with the careful hands, watchman with the hymn scrap, the midwife currently convincing a new person to join our attempt. Names make a fence around sleep so fewer worries wander in. You ease the shutter closed to a nail's width and draw the curtain's hem snug. The bedropes take your weight and answer with that contented farmyard noise, the sound of something tied right. Outside, the stars work on regardless. Inside, your breath and the ember agree on a tempo. Weather will do what it does. Bells will tell you when. Your feet will travel the map you wrote under whisper. For now, the sky can keep the ledger. You keep the pillow. Your last thought belongs to the watch. Someone out there is counting steps for you. Someone who isn't you is awake on purpose. The luxury tucks itself over your shoulders like a second blanket. You slide downward, slow as a planet. The cat expands into a pear-shaped horizon. The night, satisfied you've acknowledged its office hours, stamps your passport and waves you through. You let the stars keep their ledger and turn back to yours. The private inventory that settles a house into sleep without inviting mischief. First comes the small theater of safekeeping. You lift the bolster and slip your purse beneath it. Not because thieves are everywhere, but because peace begins with fewer places to worry about. Silver sits flatter against wood than against nerves. 2 coins migrate to the tiny stitched pocket inside your pillow. Rainy day biscuits for courage. Your clove kernel lives there too, giving the nest a faint market day confidence. The chest with the fire, famine, or taxes hoard earns one more glance. The hasp sits straight. The hinge doesn't gossip. The strap you tightened at twilight holds like a friend repeating your best traits. Light joke 1. You tell the strap it's guarding your fortunes. It replies it thought it was guarding 3.5 coins and a dramatic personality. Next, you tidy your morning self into arm's reach. Knife by the bed, blade kissed with oil and turned spine out so you find safety before sharp. Spoon on top of the folded shift because breakfast arrives faster when the first tool you touch doesn't require negotiation. Hose rolled like tame snakes, shoes pointed toward the door so when you slide in half dreaming, your feet choose out instead of into the wall. Your list: Chandler questions, guild errand, rosemary for the cobbler's wife, maybe a word with the scrivener about a wax tablet, tucks under the candlestick, an agenda that smells faintly of tallow and intent. You do the door in 3 parts. Bar set, latch lowered, the little sliver of rush wedged where wood tends to creak so it decides to be poetry instead. A broom leans by the threshold, not just for morning but for midnight folklore. Quirky tidbit to enjoy while you bank the ember. Some folks swear troublesome spirits are compelled to count straws. Give them a broom, and they'll keep busy till dawn, leaving humans to the less arithmetic work of sleeping. Whether or not spirits are mathematically inclined, you appreciate a tidy door. The rosary beads loop your wrist for a minute, and then hang from the peg where your eye will meet them before your feet meet chill boards. You touch the little pilgrim badge pinned to your hood. Tin saint who once bought you a hot pie and a dry bench on a long rain day, and murmur gratitude that feels practical, not grand. A ribbon knot over the lintel, red thread blessed with nothing but your stubbornness, waits for you to smooth it flat, a small treaty with the household air. Outside, the watch calls the hour. Inside, your room answers with the soft grammar of readiness. A mainstream fact slides onto the bench and takes its seat. Locks are no mere decorations here. Warded locks with turning keys keep honest neighbors honest and persuade less honest ones to pick different doors. Coffers and arks, the big plank chests that double as benches, often carry 2 or 3 locks with separate keys held by different hands, so one owner cannot wake up greedy and be believed by the hinges. Even guild chests play that game of shared trust. You rest the key on the peg behind a hanging hood, where a thief's fingers would need to be both clairvoyant and impolite. You rehearse, quietly, like a lullaby you once learned during a bad winter, tomorrow's first 5 moves. Wake to cardio with Saint Whoever. Fan the ember. Coax a serious flame. Set water to consider porridge. Fetch the bucket before the well cues gossip into knots. Slip the strap over the tool bundle. Make the guild street before masters remove their good faces. The route unspools lamp to lamplight in your mind. Your feet memorize it while the rest of you drifts. Rehearsal isn't worry. It's kindness to your future self. Like laying the spoon on top of the shift. Your pulse agrees and steps down a stair. From the curtain's edge, the cat blinks the world halfway shut and resumes its purr-shaped thesis. You check the bread bag's peg, then the grain chest's lid. Mice have many talents, but levitation is not usually one of them. And lay a flat stone on the corner because gravity is a good co-conspirator. The chamber pot's lid sits truer than reputation. You set a sprig of rosemary beside it anyway, less for magic than for manners. You smear a fingertip of goose grease on the door seam where night drafts campaign and tell them the election is next door. You draw the blanket up, then pause for the little ritual of counting what's in this room and what's truly yours. The tally stick, rent, rope fund, conduit tip, alms, hangs where your hand can find it blind. Your own spoon, own comb, own needle. Small sovereignties that make a life steadier than coin alone. The posy on the sill has slumped into honesty. You turn its better side toward the room, not because it will notice, but because you will. Light joke 2. You compliment the wilting mint on its posture. It vows to stand taller tomorrow if tomorrow agrees to be cooler. You let your mind play the game of, where would I hide a coin if I were my own worst habit? A floorboard? Too obvious and too squeaky? Up in the folded hem of the Sunday kirtle? Better, but you'd forget and launder your savings. Inside the hollow of the bedpost, under a plug of wax? The post is solid. Good. Wax remembers heat. Bad. You settle, as you do, for the distributed strategy. A few here, a few there, none crucial enough to break your heart if morning asks rude questions. Security, you've learned, is less a fortress than a flock. A debate wanders across the room like a late shadow. Did ordinary town households always sleep with a knife by the bed and a chest braced against the door? Or is that our dramatic imagination loving danger too much? Historians still argue whether night precautions were universal or scaled to neighborhood, season, and purse. Some trusting latches and loud dogs, others staging furniture like chess pieces with opinions. You hold a knife not from fear, but from the memory of last winter's thief who turned out to be a draft. It mostly opens letters and occasionally sachet knots. The comfort is 90% reachability, 10% steel. Breath slows into the pattern your priest would approve and your loom would recognize. You whisper names like beads, godsib, lamplighter, watchman with the hymn scrap, the midwife convincing breath to begin, the reeve with the nose that knows fish sabotage, the warden at the oven who stamps time with chalk. You add the cat out of fairness and the straw tick out of diplomacy. Gratitude is a lock that doesn't rust if you use it nightly. You pinch the candle low and let the dark move in, cautiously, like a polite guest. The ember's red thumbnail rubs the room smooth. You listen for trouble and hear only agreements. The shutter's settled exhale, the last pop of a surrendering twig, a neighbor's cough that ends with, there. Under the bolster, your coins lie like possible mornings. Under your tongue, the password lingers, candle, and the feeling it carries, safe, tucks itself into the blanket's seam. In that small elastic space before sleep, you drape an old charm over the room. May what belongs here stay. May what wanders in find only brooms to count. You've heard 50 versions, all of them good enough. You slide one hand under the pillow to feel the coin's cool moons. Not wealth exactly. Weather money, hinge money, rope money. Enough to oil a problem so it squeaks less. Enough to buy a clove for a day you need to pretend you're fine. Your other hand rests on the folded shift. Fabric holds the memory of your shoulders and tells them to unclench. The cat repositions itself to guard the door with its whiskers. Your eyes surrender their habit of cataloging. The day reshelves itself. Water, fire, bread, guild, market, church, labor, health, law, washing, tally, neighbors, supper, curfew, chores, vermin patrol, sky, safekeeping. Each volume slides home with a whisper. Light joke 3. The rope bed congratulates itself on being the only piece of furniture that demands compliments after midnight. You smile in the dark because the joke is mediocre and perfectly yours. Somewhere outside, the watch calls the hour that doesn't have a name in your mouth. Inside, your lungs are content to count fewer things. You are stacked, folded, pegged, banked. Verbs that turn a person into tomorrow's person. Coins where they won't jingle, clothes where they won't hide, errands rehearsed until they behave like lullabies. The room takes one slow breath with you. The ember holds your place in the story. Nothing is guaranteed, but everything is prepared. And in this century that counts for more than most charms, you let go. The rope hums once, pleased with its own geometry. The shutter forgets the wind to remember the wall. Sleep arrives like a patient teacher who knew you'd stop fidgeting eventually. Your last clear thought is not a thought but a picture. Your spoon on your shift, your list under the candlestick, your purse under your pillow, your name threaded through a neighborhood that knows it. That is safety, or the closest version this town sells at midnight. You lie there listening to the hush, practicing being morning, not quite ready to surrender your warm geography, but already rehearsing the first motions, hand to ember, feet to shoes that point outward like reasonable arguments, list to fingers, door to day. The cat, promoted last night to Night Watch 2, performs a final perimeter check of the curtain's hem and returns to declare the perimeter officially asleep. Your purse is content under the bolster. Your 2 rainy day biscuits in the pillow make a cool crescent on your palm when you touch them, talismans against both tight markets and tight throats. Outside, a rooster negotiates with his conscience and decides he is, indeed, the sun's employee. The ember holds its tiny red vote of confidence. You slide from under the blanket with the diplomacy you learned the hard way, and let your souls find the boards that remember you. Breath first, then the slow unfurl of fingers, poker angled where you left it like a message from the earlier you who trusted this one. You brush ash aside with a spoon's edge and uncover the glow you tucked last night. A wisp of straw, a twist of stick, the gentle bellows of your cheeks. And there it is again. Serious orange turning to flame, as if the room had been waiting for your signature to legalize daylight. Light joke 1. You tell the coals good morning, and they answer about time, which is fair. You hook the kettle nearer. Yesterday's stew, dutiful on the hob, remembers it was promised breakfast, and goes along quietly. The spoon is on the folded shift because past you knows, present you caves to scatter. You set the bread heel on the trencher and shave the small cheese thumb you granted yourself in Section 19's budget. The smell, clean and slightly bossy, wakes your mouth without waking your temper. The cat receives its retainer, 2 crumbs and a compliment, and applies itself to the extremely important task of existing attractively. Light nuzzles the shutter from behind, testing the pin you tightened yesterday. You open it to a narrow smile. The lane shows its bones, cobbles gray as unpolished pewter, a thread of mist, a cart asleep under a shrug of canvas. In the churchyard, a blackbird drafts the first stanza. The bell rope inside the porch hangs still, but is clearly thinking about exercise. You swish water over your face in the bowl you left to temper, and your skin performs the drama of being surprised and then grateful. Somewhere a baker's boy yawns into dough. A mainstream fact pads into the room with clean boots. Dawn is not the same hour for everyone. In many towns the day is reckoned from sunrise, the workday from the first bell after prime. Elsewhere civic clocks and seasonal realities collide. So people say, at bell time, or after the market opens, braiding sacred hours with practical chores. Even the word breakfast is flexible. Sometimes a wafer after mass, sometimes a heel dipped in pottage before errands. Your stomach votes for the heel now and the wafer later. You break crust. The sound is a familiar kindness. You put the strap over the bundle that will walk with you. Press the buckle, your own handiwork, until it answers with that small, satisfying click that sounds like capability. The tally stick on its peg will not be needed until evening, but you touch it anyway because wood remembers hands. On the sill, your posy has wilted into truth. You trim its browns, and the mint forgives all over again. Light joke too. You tell it you also wilt around curfew, and it says, very minty. Same. Outside, a wheel clacks once, some early cart remembering its route, and the watch's staff taps the last sentence of night. The countersign you murmured in darkness, safe, turns itself inside out and becomes an instruction for daylight. Be the kind of person who leaves your neighbors safer than you found them. You run a fingertip along the door's grain, then lift the bar and let the hinge surprise you by not squeaking. The broom that has been guarding the threshold all night leans back, job done. Whether spirits counted its straws or not, you slept. A quirky tidbit to tuck in your pocket with your spoon. Some households keep a sliver of candle stub for cock crow, the liminal wedge of time between the watch's last call and the bell's first, so they can re-enter the world like courteous guests, not invaders. You do the same. The stub sputters, then steadies, an echo of last night's patience. You eat the modest breakfast you made yourself promise. The stew has turned into a morning person. The bread accepts its destiny. Your mouth believes in the day's plausibility. You rewrap what remains of the loaf, the cheese, the sugar cone that must be hoarded like winter sunlight, and you pull the hood on, not because it is cold, but because clothing helps the mind agree to be vertical. Historians still argue whether medieval urban mornings were a chorus of bells and swift industry, or a gentler unrolling where first sleep and second sleep left time for quiet mending and prayer before commerce drilled the cobbles. Standing here, spoon against bowl, you feel like the answer is yes. There are mornings like drums and mornings like vials. This one, for now, is vial. Soon to be drum. The cat yawns a benediction and becomes a crescent on the warm flagstones, a moon you can pet. You gather the three things without which the day sulks: list, purse, patience. The patience is partly rosemary behind the ear, partly the memory that even yesterday's beetle laughed once. You tuck your clove deeper so your coins smell like a plan and not like fear. You pinch the candle low, leave the ember banked in its ash duvet, and stand in the doorway to take, as always, one slow measure of the lane. The smell of dough is honest. The wind is from the west and undecided. Somewhere a cow makes a suggestion, and someone agrees. Before you cross the threshold, you look back at the room that was boat and harbor, courtroom and hospital, workshop and stage. The strap you mended will keep faith. The hinge you oiled will keep quiet. The spoon you placed will be where it should be when luck frays. You tap the lintel twice, your punctuation mark, and you let the door find its latch. Light joke 3. You tell the straw tick not to start any parties while you're gone. It promises, unconvincingly. The first bell of the day lifts its voice. Your old friend cardio with Saint Whoever, cutting the air neatly, not as a scold, but as an expectation. The street answers with feet. You step into it, one more stitch in a fabric that held all night and plans to hold again. Could you survive one medieval day? You have, you did, you will. Beginning again with bread in your scrip, a spoon on your shift, a list under your candle, and a neighborhood that knows your name when the bell calls for witnesses. Slow now. Let the edges soften. The lines between rooms and streets and roofs blur into one gentle shoreline of sound and warmth and breath. You've done enough. The ember is tucked beneath its gray blanket. The door is barred just so. The spoon is waiting where your hand will find it without thinking, and your list has folded itself into a small, agreeable promise. Imagine the room dimming 1 degree at a time, the cat becoming a quieter curve of comfort, the shutter taking the last of the night's draft and smoothing it into the wood, the ropes of the bed humming barely at all, like a distant hive content with itself. Let the bell be farther away, not a command now, just a friendly silver thread that stretches over rooftops and fields and spires, tying every house together in a loose, kind net. You can feel it, but you don't have to hold it. Picture the market asleep for a few more moments, stalls like closed books, scales resting with their pans exactly level, a simple idea of fairness holding its breath. Picture the well a dark circle where the water has cooled itself into patience again, and the bucket rope lying slack with no errands pressing it forward. Breathe in the rosemary on your fingers, the almost sugar on your tongue, the hint of warm wood and honest wool, and something like bread that hasn't quite remembered its name. Breathe out the price of onions, the beetle's eyebrows, the way coins go missing from a purse and show up as soup. Each breath arrives longer, leaves softer, and somewhere between those long arrivals and soft departures, even the jokes decide to whisper. Let the stone under your feet become sand, then dust, then nothing at all. Let the room become a boat on an utterly still canal, sliding without oars, without hurry, past doors that all nod once and sleep again. If a worry knocks, let it count the broom straws at the threshold. If a memory scratches, stroke it once like a tame cat and send it back to its warm tile. And now, with the faintest light behind the shutter, and the smallest sound settling in the hearth, let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unhook. Let your thoughts stretch out and become slower, wider, kinder, until even counting feels like too much to ask. And the only thing left to do is rest, deeply, safely, easily, while the city holds you, and the bell watches over you, and the ember keeps your place till morning.